Okay, it is 6 o'clock. Superintendent, if you'd please, we'll call the meeting to order. And would you please call the roll?
President Holt,
Present.
Clerk Grigsby,
Present.
Trustee Poole, Trustee Travis,
Present.
Trustee Wedge.
Present.
Is there any public comment on closed session agenda items? Seeing none, it is 6 o'clock and we will recess the closed session. We will reconvene at 7 o'clock. Okay, it is 7:01 and we will reconvene here in open session. And Clerk Grigsby, would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No action was taken in closed session, and I move that we approve tonight's agenda.
Second that.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
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 And those opposed? Seeing none, it carries. Moving to item 6, and this is public comment on things not on tonight's agenda.
Lee Paris, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm ready. All right. Hi, my name is Shirley Paris. A few of you know me. I am here tonight. One of my hats I'm wearing is I have been coordinating the service clubs here in Auburn, the service club, leadership clubs, as well as Placer High. So I'm here to share some good news with you. Inside your folders, you're going to find some incredible things that the kids have done for November and December. First of all, I have to give a shout out. Principal Christine Mayberry is amazing. Without her support and her back up as far as service and leadership being important. She created the foundation, Nicole Schichtel at EV Kane, and you have added new advisors. So we've added Jill LeBeau at Auburn Elementary, Nicole, of course, still at EV Kane, Crystal McDonald and April Johnson are at Sky Ridge. And so Nicole and I have been working to coordinate and collaborate with all of the clubs at all 3 schools. So Auburn is recognized as a district of service. So inside your folder, you're going to find on the top is the Hometown Heroes Luncheon, which is what the service clubs work towards for December. So I've given you the flyer and the little thank you that we passed out. Superintendent Meyer and Greg President Holt and Clerk Grigsby. Anyway, I wanted you to see the thank yous that the kids passed out and to realize that they worked hard with Wreaths Across America in order to sell enough wreaths to not only participate in the Wreaths Across America wreath laying in December, but to put on this luncheon. So also in your folder, you will find Auburn schools are the only schools. Yes, because I make it that way. To participate in the Veterans Day essay contest. I write the prompt. So you have Cora Bergault from Skyridge, Charlotte Dickerson from EV Kane, and Nico Grossman from Skyridge. So all the kids wrote an essay for the Veterans Day celebration, and those 3 were picked. I'm getting to that one next. So the 3 on the top are the Veterans Day essays. The very last essay is special news. In fact, your principals and your superintendent don't even know this. The American Legion Auxiliary Essay Contest happens in March. And Lucy Walker wrote an essay in 6th grade at EV Kane and Mr. Solomon's class. She won first place for the unit level, which includes Roseville and Auburn. She made it to the district level, District 7, and she made it 2nd place at the state level. And I apologize, we didn't get it in the newspaper. Yes. And the best part is, as I tell the kids, writing well pays. She won $125 for that essay. So she received the check at Skyridge in Mrs. Costa's class. So I wanted you to have a copy of the essays. I wanted you to see the great things that the kids are doing through this leadership and service and the collaboration that is happening. And most importantly, I wanted to shout out to those advisors that are going above and beyond and the principals that are supporting them. And I think that pretty well covers it. If you have any questions, that's just November and December. Nicole Schichtel and the other advisors are coming back to a board meeting and they will do a presentation based on the entire year.
Thank
So-
you, Shirley.
Okay, thank you.
No other.
Okay. Seeing no other public comment, we are moving on to item 7, and association comments, starting with the Auburn Union Teachers Association.
Good evening, Superintendent Meyer and School Board. Happy New Year. I wanted to say that it has been a pleasure to begin the year with negotiations with Dr. Meyer at the table this year. She is fully aware of all of the issues that we are facing in AUSD this year. She's willing to work, communicate, and problem solve with AUTA. It is greatly appreciated. We hope to have a signed agreement to appear to you in February at the next board meeting. Fingers crossed. While reviewing the monthly financials, I saw that we are still contracting for services for $260,000, $485, and conferences, which I'm assuming is still part of CSBA, was $31,000. Our legal fees so far this year are $64,245. I also took some time to review the audit report for AUSD, which I found a few interesting areas. First, our attendance reporting was inaccurate and does not comply with state regulations. The cost is based on a decrease of 1.56 for grade level spans, which leads to the fact AUSD does not have proper procedures to place to ensure that the date within the attendance system is not reported accurately or it's not being managed accurately. Second, there seem to be issues with our internal controls over financial reporting. The district does not ensure that all transactions were calculated and recorded in a timely and accurate manner. This was due to staff, I'm assuming, which the board continued to employ even when letters from PCOE were sent out, many letters indeed, with the qualifications that this individual and the amount of mistakes that were made on every document submitted. I hope that by having Jeremy on staff now, we are finally in a position where the district has hired a qualified person to do the work well and continue to report in a timely and accurate manner. Third, the district has a responsibility to validate and verify each pupil is vaccinated for varicella and measles, as is required under Title 17. The average daily attendance for TK was overstated by 0.87 for ADA for period 2 and 0.89 for the annual, which cost the district over $9,000 for not being vigilant to check students for vaccinations. And this is for one student. The district improperly admitted the student and claimed them on average daily attendance. What are our current protocols for this not to happen again so that we don't get fined again? Fourth, school accountability. Our report cards contain information regarding school facility conditions and a form of local evaluation instrument that meets the same criteria. The FIT for Evie Kane did not match the SARC. The FIT form noted that the restrooms were poor, while the SARC stated that they were good. And the dates on these two reports were not verified. One said November 2021, and the other one said October 2022. The district is not in compliance with the related sections of California Ed Code. What protocols are in place for this lapse so it doesn't happen again? And lastly, most importantly, classroom teacher salaries in an elementary school district should spend up to 20% of the district's budget on salaries. Since the year 2022, our district has fallen short. Last year, it was 49.38% to classroom teacher salaries. This is over 10% less than what is recommended, which equals over $2 million that could have been spent on our teachers, keeping them here, keeping qualified teachers, and doing less outsourcing. How can we compete if we do not keep our qualified teachers? The district has again been reminded to make sure that they plan and prepare for meeting the 60% minimum requirement for classroom teacher salaries. How is the district going to make sure that this minimum of 60% is being saved for classroom teacher salaries? Respectfully, Sarah Liebert, AUTA President.
And do we have CSEA this evening? Okay, moving to tonight's consent agenda, item 8. I'm going to pull 8D and H.
G. I'd like to pull A.
A.
Oh, donation.
That was the first one. I said.
Oh, you did. Sorry, I
Yep.
thought you said G.
So
Okay,
so
okay,
far we've
B.
got A, D, and H. Is there anything anybody else would like to pull? Okay. Seeing none, I move that we approve the consent agenda less items 8D, H, and A.
Second.
And then clerk, if you conduct a roll call vote.
Absolutely. President Holt,
Aye.
Clerk Grigsby, aye. Trustee Poole,
Aye.
Trustee Travis, aye. And Trustee Wedge.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Okay, so trustee Travis, do you want to start us off with 8A?
Yes, at looking through the warrant report, I noticed there are quite a lot of fees for interpretive services that we're spending per month. The first one, they're not line item, but it says 913 on mine. I don't know if you guys are looking at it. Billed on the 4th of December, but it's for certified interpreting services. And that's what we're using here tonight. That's running us 1,400 plus per month, and I was hoping with looking methods of doing that. Found a couple. One of them is called Wordly AI. They have packages that start at $75 an hour, so that would greatly reduce our fee just using an AI service. I don't know how much information you want on this. But I did talk with our superintendent and she let me know that there's very few people really using the service. We don't know how many are using, I don't know if that's me. We don't know if how many are using this interpretive service or not on that, but just as an example, in September, there were 13 people listening to YouTube, and in October there were 11, November 10th, there were 10, and it's so it's a very small number, and I'd like to try and get that cost down for us. The one other one that we're paying interpretive services for is for parent-teacher conferences. And I know law enforcement uses apps where they will use Google to translate. And I'm wondering if there's another way that we could do it that's not costing us $4,500 for parent-teacher conferences. That's all.
Yeah, and question, if the board would like, we can bring data back. We have been collecting data. Dave Peters has been collecting data the last few board meetings. I believe at least 3, then this one will make 4, on how many people are attending on Zoom and what that looks like in terms of, how many are staff members or what have you, to see what we might be using for interpretive services. And then we can have a further discussion about what we might do moving forward from there.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see if possible.
Great. Please do. Travis, we put on you then to make a motion to approve the warrant report since you pulled it.
Oh, I make a motion, we would approve the warrant report.
I'll second.
And if you would please conduct a roll call vote.
Absolutely. Let's start with trustee Wedge.
Aye.
Trustee Travis.
Aye.
And trustee Poole.
Aye.
Clerk Grigsby. Aye. And President Holt.
Aye. Okay, so moving then to item 8D. I'll hand that to you, Superintendent. I know touch on that for us.
Yeah, thank you. So our donation report, just to be candid, we made an error. So we believed that we misunderstood that there was a potential grant funding coming from our libraries that we thought was through AEF, through Auburn Education Foundation, which we go through a process for those grants to be approved and then brought forward on the donation report. We were incorrect. That was a CSLA, California School Libraries Association grant. So I'd like to pull the donation report because that's not the appropriate way to take that grant funding in, and then we'll bring it back in February through the appropriate avenue for approval.
Thank you. And then on H, the school calendars. And I already reached out to the superintendent about this, but it looked like we used the color red as one of the keys, but we didn't say what that meant. So she explained that that is for the PSPS kind of snow days. So I would just ask that I'm going to move that we approve this with the note that staff updates that, puts that on the key. Are there any questions on that one? Okay, great. Then I move that we approve the 25, 26, and 26, 27 school calendars with the note that we have staff update the key.
I will second that motion.
And clerk, if you please conduct a roll call vote.
Absolutely. President Holt.
Aye.
Trustee Grigsby or Clerk Grigsby. Aye. Trustee Poole.
Aye.
Trustee Travis.
Aye.
And trustee Wedge.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, moving then to item 9 and to 9A.
Did we need to do D?
No, we're
action.
pushing that to February.
Yeah, this is CBO McReynolds, and this is our 23-24 financial audit report review. And we have our auditor online. I'll go ahead and let her introduce herself, and she conducted the audit with Christy White and Associates. And thank you.
Great. Hello. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I have a presentation to share. I'll get that started. I've just sent a request via Zoom to share. Great. Thank you. So my name is Lily Navoa. I'm a CPA with Christie White Associates, and tonight I'll be presenting the audit report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. I expect my presentation to take about 5 to 10 minutes long. I'll briefly go over our audit process. I'll talk about the responsibilities of the district versus the auditors, and then I'll dive into the audit report package. At the end of my presentation, I'll be happy to take any questions. All right. So this audit is really comprehensive, and we break up the audit into two main phases. The first phase is what we often refer to as the interim audit, and this occurs during the springtime. During this time, we're focused on internal controls, state and federal compliance. When we look at internal controls, we are testing the design and effectiveness of controls, or really you can kind of think of these as processes that would prevent, detect, and correct misstatements, whether due to error or fraud. And we're primarily looking at the processes over receipts, disbursements, and payroll. We also spend a lot of time during the interim audit going over state compliance. Sorry, I saw a note come into the chat, but it didn't relate to me. So we spend a lot of time looking at state compliance, and all of the state compliance testing is outlined in the state audit guide. And during this time, we're looking at things like attendance testing. We review attendance at the school site level and then trace it all the way to the P2 report and the annual attendance report. We're looking at things like your instructional time, your test of teacher credentials, LCAPs, SARCs. Some areas that are new this year was an ELOP program that we had to test for the first time, and then also some additional audit guidelines for the Prop 28 funding. During the interim audit, we also focus on federal compliance, and all of the federal compliance is outlined in the Office of Management and Budget Compliance Supplement. Right, and then the second phase of our audit we refer to as the year-end audit, and this occurs after the board has approved the unaudited actuals, and we are focused on the account balances at this time. So all the numbers that you see in the audit report, we're ticking and tying them. We're confirming your cash balances, recalculating your revenue, capital assets, long-term debt, things like that. Throughout the audit, the district and auditors have very different responsibilities. So the district, the members of management, and also the board are responsible for designing and maintaining effective internal controls, those same controls that I talked about us testing during the interim audit. The district is also responsible for preparing the financial statement. So all of the numbers that you see there really are belong to the district. They prepared them, and then also all of the background information that flows through to the financial statements. And the district is responsible for evaluating going concern. As an auditor, my responsibility is to provide an opinion. I'm looking to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are materially correct. And I also am responsible for conducting the audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States and standards that are applicable to governmental entities. So an annual audit is required by the state controller's office. And if you have the audit report kind of package in front of you, what it actually contains is 4 different audit report or opinion letters. The first is our independent audit report on the financial statements. And I'll just go over the 4 reports here briefly because I'm going to go into each one in more detail. We have a report on internal controls, a report on federal compliance, and a report on state compliance. If you have the report in front of you, I think page 75 does a really nice job of summarizing all of our different opinions and the results of the audit. So you can see that the financial statement audit, we issued an unmodified opinion. And although that sounds lackluster, that actually is the best opinion that you can receive. If you want to read our report in more detail, it can be found on page 1. Our second report can be found on page 66. This is the report on internal controls, and this is specifically required for governmental entities. You'll see that we did not identify material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, and there wasn't any non-compliance that would be material to the financial statements noted. Our third report, is on federal compliance and internal controls around federal compliance. We issued, again, an unmodified opinion, so the best you can receive, without any material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, and no findings. This year, we selected the Child Nutrition Cluster and then also the Education Stabilization Fund as the major programs for federal compliance testing. And that Education Stabilization Fund, that's all of your COVID money, so the ESSER and the GEAR money that was spent. Our fourth and final report can be found on page 71 over state compliance. Again, we issued an unmodified opinion, so the best you can receive without any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies. There was one audit finding that I'll go into more detail now. This finding can be found on page 78 and has to do with attendance reporting. We noticed that on the annual attendance report, there was just some misclassification and the ADA between grade levels. So when we were tying the annual support to the supporting documents, we noticed a variance in these grades by section, although the net difference was a little less than 2 students. You can see about 122 and 123 kind of inversely reported here. This doesn't have an impact on finding, as this ADA line item funding was based on P2, which was correctly reported. We also posted 2 audit adjustments. The first was due to an understatement of accounts receivable in the cafeteria fund. I think this just related to the June CNIPS claim that came probably after the year-end close process. We recorded that revenue. And then we also posted a fund balance transfer. This relates to taking the deferred maintenance fund and then also the special reserve fund for post-employment benefits and moving those into Fund 1. This adjustment is something that we do every year, and it's just kind of to reconcile how you do your reporting and what's required for the audit report presentation. And before I open up the floor for any questions, I just wanted to give a shout out. The audit process is quite intensive, and I'm happy to report that we did not encounter any difficulties. Our requests were provided promptly, and it was a really smooth process. Are there any questions that I can help answer at this time?
No, I don't think so. Thank you for that audit. Thank you for going through that. Great job.
So I think, we really appreciate working with Christy White, and thank you, Lily, for all your hard work. And it's been a pleasure working with the audit firm. A lot of the stuff, since they were brought up tonight on audit, were prior year corrections that have been taken care of, with the exception of repeat finding with the CEA requirement. And the districts looked at that. And the main reason for not complying with the CEA requirement is the use of contractors. So if we could hire employees to put in those contractor positions, that would bring down our contractor cost, and we could put that towards salaries, and then also spending out COVID funds. So those have gone away. Any one-time funds we can't really dedicate towards teacher salary because they're not ongoing. So we're taking every steps we can to make sure that we're in full compliance and everything was unmodified and the best report that you could get for audit. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions about the audit? Okay. All right, I move that we approve 9A. Audit.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
And those opposed? Seeing none, it carries. And moving to item, and she is gone. Moving to item 9B. And before I continue on, do we have public comment on any of these action items tonight? Just want to make sure I get to them. Okay. So 9B, approval of the revised schedule of board meetings for 2025.
Yeah, so if you pull up the revised schedule, you'll see 2 special sessions on there. The board will be participating in governance training that will happen over 2 4-hour meetings. Those special sessions were added for that purpose. And so we just, if happy to answer any questions, and then we just need approval to add those to our overall board meeting schedule.
Are there any questions on this? Okay. I move that we approve the revised scheduled board meetings for 2025.
I'll second that.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Seeing none, carries. And moving to item 9C, the architecture contract.
Yeah, this is increase to the architecture fees for district projects that are ongoing. And when we, I'll just go ahead and read this here. This is the rationale for this. The request seeks approval for architecture fees of $89,900 to address scope change and incorporate accessibility improvements into the construction drawings and specifications for DSA approval. The scope change involves relocating the play structure to the front of the school, which requires additional design work. District administrators, myself and Superintendent Meyer, met with the TKK teachers on site and gave them enough time to decide where best to put the playground. And they decided that the front of the school would be the best option based on their feedback. We had kind of thought that that would be the case, but we wanted to make sure and check with staff to make sure that we were listening to everybody and making sure that that is where it needs to be, and it's the best place we could put it. With the additional architecture cost, the project for the playground and the move of the final cost anticipated to be the cost, it would be cost neutral or slightly less. So it's preferred to be up there, and it's not going to be projected to be additional cost because there's not going to be as much grading work or retaining walls as putting the playground between the 2 classroom sites. The initial request for unreasonable hardship was developed at no cost to the district and received preliminary DSA approval. However, there's additional fees required to develop construction documents, including plans, details, and specifications. And these are things when you go into a project and it has DSA review, we don't know exactly what's going to be required. So through that process, they start at the front of the school, and it's determined that we need to work on the drop-off zone and spend approximately $200,000 in improvements to meet the ADA requirements for that project. The approval request will ensure completion of the 2-step DSA process and address the required project adjustments. Funding for this change will come from restricted capital facilities funds and are in the approved budget and adjusted accordingly. So this doesn't affect the general fund, and we can only spend this money on facilities. And we're pretty deep in this project, and without doing this, it would be unreasonable to not approve it, in my opinion. So the district recommends that we approve it, and that's all.
Looking at the drawing for it, and I think I know where it is, but can you describe it to where they are placing this playground?
Yeah, the playground will be, as you're looking at the front entrance of E.B. Kane towards the office, it's to the left towards the Wildcat Gym. And it's in a recessed area, so they'll be fully fenced, and it'll be able to, be accessible for drop off and pickup if we have staff there with the children as they arrive. So it makes it a little more, user friendly. And we looked at the other schools, and we were concerned that it was in the front of the school, but all of our other TKK playgrounds are also at the front of the school. So it's not a change from what we're doing, but we will have it fenced and monitored.
And is there an entrance into this playground from the building itself, or is it just an outside entrance walkway, pathway?
There's an inside, well, there's a school entrance, there's a double door there. Do you know where that water, it's like not a usable water fountain, but it's like historical looking water fountain. So when you go out those two doors, then there would be access to the playground. It's fully fenced, so there would be a gate you would go through. And then if you can kind of picture that in your mind, there's a set of stairs there. We'll cannibalize some of that for space for the playground and then expand ramps that go along the side. So there'll still be enough ingress and egress, but it will be through like a side ramp system now versus stairs down the center.
And again, you were saying that this is money that is designated for facilities that are being used for the project.
Yes, that's correct.
And when you look at the cost breakdown, that $31,000 is the change in plans, but the request for undue hardship, I think that's 58. That we were going to have to do no matter what, given that we have to do a request for undue hardship at the school, given the ADA requirements, upgrades that are required.
Do we have an update on that request? By any chance?
The request has been tentatively approved, so we're just working through the process now. It just takes some time due to DSA and government staff.
And do we have an updated timeline? If we were to approve this tonight, do we have an idea of what that's going to look like?
We can go ahead and start construction on the playground as soon as the plans are done. It probably wouldn't be until April at the soonest. We will wait for the drop-off construction improvements for ADA to do that during summertime, so it doesn't impact students or staff driving through or drop off. So our anticipated start date earliest would be April. Without any, there could be unforeseen timelines or construction issues that we're not aware of at this time, but that's what we're told.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I move that we approve the architecture contract.
I'll second that.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Seeing none, it carries. And moving to item 9D, approval of the 25-26 after-school education safety grant.
The after-school education safety grant, as presented, it includes the grant award notification for this year and the request for next year. The plan also includes a plan that we come up with our partners, and this is a plan that's been in use for over 6 years now at Auburn Union School District. We received some comment on the plan, so we suggest that we pull the plan for additional revise because it's not required for CDE approval for the 24-25 grant program. We want to go back and look at with the board and our partners to make sure that it meets our current requirements. And we do want to continue the funding. So I propose that we approve the grant award notification as presented and the grant award application renewal form so that we can meet the deadline for January 30th to request these funds. And staff recommends approval of the grant award and the grant award renewal. And you can go ahead and pull the plan for future review and approval.
So you're asking us to just approve the grant funding, accept the funding, and then take the application and review it? Is that correct?
No, the application is for the grant award renewal, And then there's a plan in there. The plan needs to be reviewed since we had additional comments and concerns with, grammatical errors and program content. We want to go ahead and take an additional look at that. That's an ongoing plan that doesn't have to be submitted with the grant.
Is that the one that starts on page 13? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome.
So are you saying that we submit this as written and then amend it? So, I don't,
I think what they're suggesting is we essentially pull, that would be the plan that starts at page 13, remove that from it because it's not required to be a part of this application. But
Okay.
do we accept the grant that has been awarded? We'd say yes, please, and thank you, and then submit the application. With the note that the plan part, which starts on page 13, we would pull that for staff to develop with partners.
is that due on the 31st though, or?
That's not.
That's
The
not,
the
okay.
application is, but the plan is not.
Okay, I see.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, we can modify that at any point. So then we would work on modifying the plan moving forward.
Will that come come before us for approval for modifying that?
Yeah, we can bring it back. We can take your input and then bring it back for the amendments to the plan itself.
That's correct.
Do you want us, we can clarify one more time what the motion would be potentially, and then that it would be to approve the award notification and the renewal form, but to pull the plan for future revision. Would be 3 parts essentially.
I'm also making sure that the questions I had were part of, making sure I have
Oh,
which section
yeah,
they were part
absolutely.
of here. Questions on that? Okay. So for 9D, then the after school education safety grant, I would move that we accept the award of the grant and the application for renewal form, but we pull the plan for development and future review.
I second that.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And those
Aye.
opposed? Seeing none, that motion carries. And moving to item 9E, board policy updates.
So this has turned into quite an interesting one. So if you remember, we gave you this for first read last time. The packet is around Title IX regulation changes that came around in August 2024 and updating our policies to align to the 2024 Title IX regs. Previous to that, you had the 2020 Title IX regs that we were following. Between last board meeting and this board meeting on January 9th, you had a federal district court decision in Kentucky that vacated the Title IX 2024 regulations. So then attorneys' offices were sending emails to school districts saying, hey, here's what you should do. So their recommendation is that school districts transition back to their 2020 Title IX regulations, given the vacating of the 2024 regs, and that you review any harassment and discrimination policies you've revised since that change in August to revert back as well. So essentially that entire packet you have in front of you to approve, they are saying you should go back to the old regulation. So in order to follow what the recommendations are and the way the law is now, you would not want to approve the board policies we put forward with the new 2024 language, if that makes sense. But feel free to ask me any questions you would like.
Yeah, I think, okay, sorry, go ahead.
So this is, I don't even know how to ask this. So this is more than just your recommendation. This is
This is a
Right.
court order.
The law has changed between these being literally between them being presented to you for first read and second read, the law changed. So
Well, I think it's just an injunction right now.
Well, correct,
Really.
correct.
So-
It's an injunction, but it means that we have to go back to following the 2020 regs, which are what we were modifying to update to 2024. So now we don't want to do that. We'll stick with 2020. And when all of this gets sorted out, we'll go forward with whatever the findings are.
And it just applies to Title IX, correct?
Correct. It's Title IX law changes specifically that took place in August.
But we're talking about the entire policy, not just that where it's noted. We're talking about going back to that last year's policy.
Everything
Yeah.
to do with Title IX.
Right, because because essentially what happened in the updates that you saw, we were updating all of that language to apply. We were looking at timelines, various things that are all part of 2024 that no longer need to be updated. So the only change in there that you'll see that we would definitely want to keep, and we can, it's a little much to like try to work that all out at this moment, but I will say we'll just need to bring back the minor change that our Title IX coordinator was previously listed as the Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services. That's a position that doesn't exist anymore. And so it's actually Kelly Young, our Director of Student Support. So we'll make sure our website reflects that and what have you. And when all of this is kind of figured out and we update the policies, we'll make sure everything is correct. But that's the only piece because that position no longer exists.
So I think I'd just like to ask to make sure you run that past legal and the team and make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing.
In terms of any changes
Correct.
moving forward, absolutely. Yep.
And anything else that may have come up between 2020 and that.
Yes. CSBA will give us some recommendations and certainly we can also ask legal for guidance. I think all attorneys are trying to give guidance as best they can at this point, given that it just came out a few weeks ago. So, yeah.
So quick question. So by taking no action on this policy update, on the last page, you have board bylaw 9220, which isn't part of the Title IX.
Yeah.
So that's something we're not taking action on as well.
Correct. Yeah. Well, you would take action, your motion would be not to approve. So it would be action. It just wouldn't be to approve. And then anything that needs to move forward into additional, you'll have another packet that comes to you next month, for example, then we'll make sure to include it there.
So the motion then would be to not approve the board policy update. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Unless you want to pull anything specifically from.
Okay. I will move that we do not approve the board policy updates.
And I will
Okay.
second that.
Wait, we need one of you. Which one?
I think Emily got it.
Emily?
first.
Okay.
Got it first.
So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed? Seeing none, that carries. And I'm sorry, folks, I know we've been moving pretty quick, but if we could take a 5-minute recess, I need to get some more hot water. I keep coughing here. So it is 7:46, so let's round up to 7:47. We'll reconvene at 7:52. Okay, it is 7:52 and we will reconvene here. Starting with item 10A for info and discussion, the multi-year school linked fee schedule.
Okay, so I wanted to bring this back to you. If you recall, we talked about it in September. I'm going to start out reviewing a little bit of what we talked about then very briefly. And then I'm going to talk to you kind of about where we've gone since then, where we are on this journey of multi-payer fee schedule, and where our next steps are in terms of deciding where we want to go. So I think I have to say, go ahead, Dave. There he goes. He's at home clicking away. So let's review where we were. I'm just going to do 3 of the slides. They're exactly as presented in September. Next slide. So if you recall, we talked about Medi-Cal billing system. We currently do Medi-Cal billing here in AUSD. This is different than multi-payer fee schedule, but they are similar. So it was kind of to give you a heads up on what this looks like for us. So what Medi-Cal billing is that we can bill for students with IEPs for services they receive, as long as they receive those through their IEP and they qualify for Medi-Cal. When we look, if you look at the bottom of this slide, when we look at what we received at our last full year that we're able to calculate on, which would be 22-23, AUSD received about $79,000 in reimbursements for Medi-Cal fees or Medi-Cal services. Go ahead and next slide. Again, there are limitations to Medi-Cal. This is where multi-payer fee schedule starts to come in to fill some of these holes. There are services that are not reimbursable. So for example, things that are provided to students through general education, not through an IEP or special ed, things like small group individual counseling or some sort of medication training. We can bill for nursing services, say for diabetic care under multi-payer fee for gen ed students. And then also students who are privately insured, we cannot bill for because they do not receive Medi-Cal. So multi-payer fee schedule was something launched by Department of Healthcare Services as a potential avenue to fill some of these gaps to bill for general education services and also those received by students with private insurance. Next slide. Just to look at our numbers, again, this is 22-23. Auburn had an enrollment of just about 1,548 students. Of that, we had 234 who received special education, and about half of those, just under, received free and reduced, qualified for free and reduced lunch. We can kind of correlate that roughly to who would qualify for Medi-Cal. So if we look at that, that means about 15% of our population received IEP services. And if we assume that about half those students qualified for Medi-Cal, we can roughly correlate that about 7% of our students were generating that $79,000 of reimbursement. Okay, so now let's kind of put that to the side. That's where we were and kind of what we talked about for that background piece, and talk about where we've been for multi-payer fee schedule since that time. So first of all, what is multi-payer fee schedule? It's a system that allows schools that have standardized school-based behavioral health services to be reimbursed, including students with private insurance. The agency that oversees this is the Department of Healthcare Services, and throughout here you'll see me refer to it as DHCS. And the question is kind of, where is the fee schedule currently? And some of the conversation around fee schedule is that it's a plane being built while flying. And I'm going to use that analogy a little bit later because I think it's a good one to kind of think about where we are with this, or where DHCS is with this. And it is a plane being built, but it's not yet flying. So in short, DHCS is trying to launch this system statewide. They're anticipating at this point, they're saying 2026, 2027, but they're asking for input in the meantime on how to build that fee schedule model. So where is AUSD and where is our county? Because that comes into play here in terms of fee schedule. So Placer County Office of Ed joined what's called a cohort with DHCS. They joined cohort 1. And what being in a cohort says is we want to move towards billing to the fee schedule, but we want to have a say in how this is built. We want to try it out before we fully jump on board and that when that plane takes off to fly. And so Placer County is part of cohort 1. Part of their duty as a county office is to help us as districts within the county learn more about things like fee schedule and to provide us with an avenue for feedback as well. In order to participate in that, in September, after the discussion at the board meeting, an MOU was signed with Placer County, which was attached to this board item 2, to participate in their consortium. And what that means is Placer County has funds that they receive through Department of Healthcare Services, and they use those funds to provide services to schools. For us in Auburn, that looks like our wellness center. And part of giving us those funds means that those are avenues that help us kind of build capacity towards fee schedule. So wellness provides some support services around a fee schedule model. And then it also gives us an avenue for providing input. So part of being part of the consortium means that monthly I attend, it's about 90 minutes or so once a month called the Continuum of Practice or COP, where it's Placer County, other districts in our county, and we all kind of talk about and learn about what's happening with fee schedule and then provide feedback that Placer County can then bring to the Department of Healthcare Services. All right, so go ahead, next slide, thank you. So that's where we are. We're part of, sorry, I got ahead of myself. We're part of the community of practice. And this consortium that we're part of, that community of practice in, is overseen by PCOE, and it's part of their participation in cohort 1. So it all kind of ties in together. And then, like I said, they're sharing feed info with us, and we're also sharing info with them to bring back to Department of Healthcare Service. All right, next one. So where are we? So at this point, we have to decide whether or not Auburn, we want to move forward with this next step, which is to join cohort 4. And what I will say is, remember how I said this is a plane that's being built? So this week on Monday, when we're part of this continuum of practice, there are a few additional pieces we learned about. So there's actually 3 options that Auburn is going to have and for you to consider tonight and give staff direction on. One of them obviously is don't go forward with cohort 4. Well, actually, let me start with the first one. One of them is go forward with cohort 4. Okay. The other one, you have 2 options if we go forward with if we do not go forward with cohort 4. We can either say we're not doing it, and as part of that MOU, we're going to exit from the MOU and be out of the consortium. Or this third option became available to us this week, and I'll talk more about that. But in short, that option is we can stay in the consortium. We can give feedback to PCOE to bring to DHCS, but we actually do not have to enter cohort 4 to stay within the consortium. And give me a little time through these slides, and then I'll explain to you why that is when I get to the kind of deliverables or asks of being part of a cohort. So as we go through this, keep that in mind, that those are the things that you need to consider of if we want to move forward with cohort 4. And if we don't, there are going to be 2 options that you're going to have to give direction on. Okay, so what are these different cohorts? So we're in bold there, PCOE Consortium, because that's where we live right now. And what we're trying to decide, click it for me one time, please, Dave. What we're trying to decide is if, sorry, one more. If we want to enter cohort 4 and move into that next phase, which is that early onboarding phase. So that light blue planning and learning where we live right now is the building the plane. As part of the consortium, we have an avenue to give feedback. And I will say there's a value to being part of that conversation because this is a statewide initiative. There are a lot of counties and districts that are a part of this. And Placer County and Auburn are unique, and it's good to provide our input, right? So there's a benefit there, but there's also some costs. So we'll talk about that. So we need to decide if we want to move to cohort 4. Keep giving input on building that plane. If we join cohort 4, we're saying we want to go to this early onboarding stage. One more time, Dave. And that says we are looking at potentially putting that plane on the runway and testing out the mechanics of it, right? We're going to try it. We're going to see how this fee schedule works. We're going to see what billing looks like for our people. We're going to kind of get into it a little bit and then provide some more feedback, but we're going to try to try it out and see if there's any feedback that we want to provide to DHCS further input, or if we want to keep moving forward with the fee schedule. One more time, Dave. And then lastly, DHCS will launch this sometime in 2026, 27, or potentially if they're delayed along the way, it'll be after that. But that's what they're predicting right now. And if you don't participate in a cohort, then your choice is once it's fully launched in 26, 27, you can also join at that point. So saying no to a cohort doesn't mean you can never build a fee schedule. It just means you're not going to be an early onboarder to fee schedule. DHCS is predicting right now that they'll have 2 opportunities per school year for onboarding. Probably it's going to be July and January would be my guess, but you can choose to onboard it at 2 different points during the school year down the road once the plane is built and flying. All right, one more time. This is an important caveat. So right now we live here in this green circle in planning and learning. And even if you say yes to cohort 4, there is one additional step before you can get on the runway, if you will. And that is that you have to sign a PPA with Department of Healthcare Services. And that's a participation agreement. So what that means is DHCS is crafting a program manual right now. And that program manual has all the rules. You agree you're going to give info to parents in this way. You're going to comply with HIPAA. You're going to, you're going to bill in this manner, and you're going to send information. We're going to talk about that. You need to give us some information about students so we can match them to their insurance. You agree to participate in all of that. And that if you don't sign that PPA, even if you're in the cohort, you cannot move forward to early onboarding or to statewide implementation because you have to agree to play by the rules that are part of the program. What you'll notice here is that cohort 1, it says some of them are in early onboarding and some are still in planning and learning, including PCOE. So right now those PPAs are available. Cohort 1 participants can sign them and go towards early onboarding. But what doesn't exist is the program manual. It's kind of partially written, but not fully done. So what some people in cohort 1 have said is, we're okay with that. We're going to test it out without a playbook, if you will. And what others in cohort 1 have said, like our county, and probably if someone asked me what I would do, I'd be with PCOE on this one. I'm not going to say I'm going to play by the rules till I know what the rules are. So they haven't signed those PPAs. So Placer County is actually not billing to the fee schedule yet, even though they're part of cohort 1, but some people in the cohort are outside of our county. So I just want to make sure that part is clear. All right, one more time, Dave. So again, what we're talking about, oh, there we go. What we're talking about is kind of, do we want to keep moving down this path? Do we want to go into that yellow circle? Okay. All right, next one. All right, so if you're going to ask this question about, do we want to do the thing? You're going to want to know the cost benefit analysis. So let's talk about the benefits. Obviously, I think what we talk about, we all can kind of wrap our head around is there's a financial benefit here, right? There's a potential to financial benefit. There's a positive inflow of reimbursements that would come to us for gen ed services and for privately insured students and Medi-Cal eligible students through general education that we don't currently have. We cannot bill for those students. We absolutely provide service if they need it in the model that we currently have, but we don't receive any reimbursement for that. So there's a benefit to receiving some of that funding. And what DHCS is saying is that this is ongoing funding, right? Fee schedule's here, it's going to stick around. It's not one time, but this is a permanent source of funding that you can count on if you continue to build a fee schedule year over year. So those are some of the benefits. Programmatic impacts are potentially some benefits. And this is, what DHCS is saying is that it could increase your ability to expand programming in your identified areas of need. So if you have additional need in areas of behavioral health, you can use some of these dollars to fund that where you wouldn't otherwise have funding. And therefore you can expand services that your students need. All right, go ahead, Dave. So in order to kind of talk about the benefit, we should talk about just, I think, a dollar amount. And Jason had asked me actually, and it's a good question. He said, can you just estimate how much we would get from fee schedule? And it's a great question, but the fee schedule document of what you can bill for is 18 pages long. And I would have to go through every single thing that we do that possibly could build to that fee schedule. So the whole picture was a little bit hard for me to put together right now. But what I could do is look at one provider and one service just to give you an idea. So what I chose was small group services that our counselors and mental health specialists provide. So this would be things like our zones of regulation group that we do with our younger students to recognize how they're feeling and then apply their coping strategies, right? I'm feeling red, Just angry, I can use deep breathing, get me back to regulated, participate in class. Things like that. So go ahead, Dave, and click the button. So here's what you'll see on the left side. We had counselors estimate, or not estimate, they told us what they offered last semester. We're on trimesters, but they do these twice a year. So first half of the year, they offered 6 small groups, typically in an 8-week cycle. And they're doing 2 of these a year. So they do 6 groups in the fall, 6 groups in the spring. That means they're doing 12 groups total, and they serve about 8 students per group on average. So that's 96 students served annually. One school site, one counselor, they serve 96 students annually. All right, so go ahead one more, Dave. So we take those 96 students at the top and we look at fee schedule. Fee schedule says that we can be reimbursed $8.04 for every 15 minutes that a student is served in a setting like small group. So what we have to say is how long are those blocks of time? Each of those sessions are 30 minutes. So we take those 30 minutes and we say, okay, that's 2 blocks of time. And there's 8 sessions total that we're offering. And so for 96 students for 30 minutes, we would be receiving, given 8 weeks of instruction, we would be reimbursed for 1,536 15-minute blocks, if that makes sense. That's how it's going to get billed. And that translates to $12,000 annually. This assumes a few things, right? It assumes all of those parents agree. They're all agreeing to signing to have their student in the program. But once they have their student in the program, they also have to agree to allow us to bill to fee schedule. So we are assuming in this analogy that every parent has said, yes, you can bill to fee schedule for my child. An additional thing that we learned, and we'll see on the last slide in terms of questions, because I believe Greg X asked this last time, is there going to be a copay to families? And the answer is no, there's not going to be a copay. But we also learned that there won't be a payment on fee schedule to school districts for high deductible plans until parents have reached their threshold for that high deductible. So that could be a problem because this also assumes that not only do they all say yes to fee schedule, but they also all had plans that pay out, because high deductible plans, if they don't reach their cap, will not, if that makes sense. And stop me at any point because this is so much information. You don't have to wait till the end if you have a question. So keeping those things in mind, very best case scenario, a counselor could bill about $12,000 in the year for, or we could be reimbursed for their service $12,000. This isn't a change to service. This is exactly what we currently do. All right, go ahead, Dave. Next slide. So then we have to think about concerns, kind of the cost side of the cost benefit analysis. Here are some questions that have been brought up by board members, by community members, just kind of all of us talking about and thinking about fee schedule. What are some of these costs? First of all, and this is something I think about a lot, right? Because we have a lot of people that work for us and they do a lot of hard work. How much of an impact is this going to be on them? That means Jeremy doing all the, some of the billing components. That means our executive assistant staff, and it certainly means our providers, because that counselor who provided those 1,500 and so on blocks of time that could be reimbursed has to enter data to make sure that those blocks are reimbursed properly. And that's not nothing, right? So I also collected data as a rough estimate on that, and we'll talk about that in a second. What are the impacts on academic time, right? Are we talking about an increase in service that take kids out of school and then they're getting less of reading, writing, math, all the things that we are here to do? So we'll talk about that. How will student information for billing be shared? That's a big one, right? We're a school, we follow FERPA. We actually have to follow HIPAA with this process, which is a higher burden of confidentiality. So we'll talk a little about that. What information is provided to parents so they know what they're getting into and what they're agreeing to when they sign on if we were part of fee schedule. And then we already talked about this, but will copays be charged was a question as well. All right, go ahead, Dave. So what is the workload on staff? So individual provider estimates. So those same people that I asked about how much small group do you do? I said, okay, imagine this. Imagine you did those small groups, 96 students served annually in those 30-minute groups. How much would it take if it followed the Medi-Cal billing structure? And they're familiar with that because they bill the Medi-Cal. What do you think it would take? And so what I got back was that this is a conservative estimate. Maybe it will be a little bit less, but it would be safe to say it would probably take about 30 minutes. You do your 30 minutes of small group, and then you take about 30 minutes to fill out all those paperwork. You have to fill out for each student individually because we have to send those off individually. Then you have to keep a attendance log, there's some various steps. So they're thinking half an hour each time they give a session, which means those 96 sessions of small group would take 48 hours of data entry over the course of a year.
Would they be doing some of that anyway? Like, would any of it overlap of what they would typically do after a session like that?
Well, good question. So yes, they would be keeping attendance logs. They would be figuring out, because you want to know, you have to also talk to parents about like, okay, we did 8 sessions. Here's how your child did. So if there's entry data assessments and exit data, they're doing all of those things anyway. And some of that may be incorporated in that 30 minutes. And I'm happy you
Service
brought that up.
tracking.
Yeah, service tracking. I'm happy you brought that up because that was something that we talked about when we talked to our counselor, but we just wanted to be candid that like, this isn't nothing either, right? So it's going to take them some time. And that billing component will certainly be a little bit extra, but it might not be all the 30 minutes. You're right on that.
That time spent filling out all this paperwork, is that going to be billed to the fee schedule or to the district?
That cannot be billed to the fee schedule. The only thing that can be billed to the fee schedule is the service to the student. Yeah, so that would be out of that.
But it's included in it would be included in their duties, right? So the time would be considered under their duties with their salary, I'm
Oh,
assuming.
correct.
It's not
Yes.
like extra time.
So it would be like in their work day, but we couldn't get reimbursed for that time through fee schedule. Yeah.
I wonder if there will be some though, because I know like an in-home treatment, you do get to bill for paperwork. There is some, like when you're billing insurance, there is some paperwork billing time. So that might be something as a part of that cohort. That's one of the parts of building the plane.
Correct.
Because yeah. in
Yes,
other
and that
areas
is
you
a good
can.
and that is a good point that we could ask those questions. These questions are some of the questions that we're asking. I think we'll probably talk about I think it comes, it's right there, third party biller. So we use a third party billing system to manage our data flow for Medi-Cal billing called MBT, Medi-Cal billing technology. Is that right? Yeah. MBT, Medi-Cal billing technology. MBT is trying to onboard to the fee schedule as a third party biller as well. So that was one of the big questions we were asking as part of the consortium. Are the same third party billers we're using now going to onboard to the fee schedule? Because I just very candidly said in the group, I'm like, my biggest concern and my biggest ask here is how do I make it simpler for a provider, right? If I have a counselor who can enter all the data into MBT, and MBT can run an algorithm in there that says this data goes to Medi-Cal, this data goes to fee schedule. Like if we go down this road, that's what I want because that makes their life so much easier. And the more time they can spend with kids and the less time doing paperwork, the better off we all are, right? So that's some of the conversations that we've been having as part of that consortium. So district office staff, what's our kind of time that we're going to have to spend on this? Currently unknown right now with third-party biller systems because DHCS is using Carillon and that you have to take our information and feed it to Carillon, which is the conversation that happens with Sutter and Kaiser and all of that. So how those two fit together, we're not entirely sure, but as of Monday, we are hopeful that MBT is going to onboard to this system, so it will make it a little bit easier. And then ongoing participation in the planning and learning stage would allow for more information on this step. Here's the additional piece I got on Monday about district office staff workload. So as anything you do where you're onboarding to something, we're going to talk about a grant in a second. Anything you do, there's always an ask in terms of learning on the part of the people doing the work. So us at the district office level. And that was a little bit fuzzy on what that might look like. But on Monday, we got a little more clarity. It sounds like it's going to be 2 hours a week that we have to dedicate to online learning with Carillon and DHCS. And about half of that will be learning for us, and then half of it will be feedback from us to them. And I will be totally honest that is a pretty heavy lift for a district of our size because typically the person attending at this point is me, and that's doable at 90 minutes a month. But that would be up to about 8 hours a month, right? So a whole work day dedicated to this kind of feedback to DHS. So that was kind of a hard pill to swallow, but I want to be honest that is what we were told on Monday will likely be the ask in terms of professional learning.
Were they looking at that as something temporary or ongoing for as long as we are part of this?
No, during the building stage as part of cohort 4. So only if you're part of the cohort is that a requirement. I should be clear about that. Yeah, do you want to repeat it?
Would that go into 26, 27, or 27, 28?
It would go into let's see, where are we? This year and all of next year. Because they're planning to fully launch in August 2026. And so the cohort will only last up until that launch point. It's about 18 months or so from now,
Assuming they launch on time.
assuming they launch on time. Yes. Okay, so impacts on academic time. I wanted to talk about this a little because obviously it's important, an important thing to talk about. Dave, can you hit the button one time for me, please? So anytime we think about service we're providing to students, and I want to be very clear, we're looking at access. And I use this house diagram a lot. Obviously, the car means they come to school. The social emotional front porch means they have to be ready to learn, right? And then they walk through the door, and the inside of the house is all the stuff you think about schools giving to kids: math, science, reading instruction. We have some kids, to use this analogy, that kind of hang out on that front porch longer than we want them to, right? And some of them have some pretty big behaviors that impact their access to education and may even impact the access of other students in the class. And I think you've heard about that being talked about, right? Through some of our public comment and just some things we're working on in our district. We're aware of that. That's everywhere, right? It's not unique to us. But when we're thinking about providing services, we're always looking at what can get us through that door. So I do want to be clear that, I also want to say this about fee schedule. DHCS wants us to participate. I think ultimately all of us want to reap the benefits of getting some dollars back for the work we're already doing. That sounds good to schools, right? But some of that promotion has been, oh, you can expand your services, so on. And in some cases, maybe, but only if we need them. I want to be clear about that. Only if we see a need in our data, only if it helps us get more kids through that access door. And when we're billing a counselor for all their small group at $12,000, you think we have 3 counselors, even if there was a perfect system, we make $36,000 off a fee schedule getting reimbursed. That's not going to pay for a person. So it's really the truth is it's really probably going to be more of an offset than something that's going to allow us to like build something super large, but that offset will certainly help when we try to do some other things like add a little bit more time here or there. But the realization of it being a drastic increase, I think we're all kind of being honest in the consortium to talk to each other and say, this is going to help. And we would be very happy for the help, but it's not going to be something that creates enough dollars to fund entirely new programming. Okay. Student information. I think this is important. Information has to be shared with insurance carriers. They have to be able to match kids with their insurance. And we have to follow HIPAA in order to share that information. So that's a higher bar. In order to do that, parents have to agree to participate in the fee schedule. And we have to provide them with a privacy practice agreement, which is standard HIPAA language that you would sign at the doctor's office. Attorneys would look through that for us and make sure that our privacy practice agreement was correct, but essentially tell them you have a right you have a right for your child's information to be protected in this way, and then a second signature on do you now agree to be part of fee schedule. And if they didn't sign that fee schedule agreement and the privacy practice agreement, we would still provide the service that they agreed to for their child, but we wouldn't build a fee schedule for it. Yeah.
And a HIPAA piece too. So would only then specific staff be trained on HIPAA handling, and they would be the ones to be the custodians of those records?
Anyone who bills to fee schedule needs to understand those requirements. Yes.
And would there be additional staff, say office staff, that would be involved in organizing those files? Would they be involved at all?
Most likely no, because if it follows Medi-Cal. So with Medi-Cal, if you are the person that provides the service, you have to be the person that enters the data. So for example, like we have contractors who provide service for students on IEPs. They don't typically have Auburn Union School District email addresses. And we have to try to figure out a way to do that because they can't bill Medi-Cal service without that, because it's very protected that only staff who are providing the service bill for it. So I can't have an LVN have my RN bill for what my LVN did. The LVN has to enter it on their own. So it probably most likely follow that. And those people would be trained on what they have to do. Yeah. Okay, and then I want to talk about this piece because this has gone around a lot around electronic health records. And I looked into this. This was new information to me 3 weeks ago, maybe. And I looked into it quite a bit. So an electronic health record is just like it sounds. It's charting and a lot of information. Hospitals create electronic health records. The question is, if we participate in fee schedule, do we have to create electronic health records? And this is a question that not just I was asking at the last continuum of practice, but a lot of people. And you do not have to create an electronic health record. You do have to share information, name, date, state ID number typically, to match a student and of course their insurance policy number. But you do not have to provide all these charting notes and what would be part of an electronic health record. And when I was asking in the consortium about this, most districts and also our county office are not looking at using electronic health records because one, they're very time consuming. It's more information than the system needs. And they also are very, very expensive because you have to have outside providers who help maintain these electronic health records. I will not say that there are districts who I will say there are districts who are using electronic health records, but it is not a requirement. And in our county, with our county office, and certainly if we were to go down this path, I don't think that would be something that we investigated.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
When I was in the CSBA workshop specifically on these multi-payer fee system, they were pushing that districts pick up an electronic health record, software
Mhm.
to use. And there were a lot of districts saying, well, I'm using this one, or I'm using that one, or what do you think about this? It was on the table, like that's where it's going. Just nobody else was in there except for me in
Yeah.
that one. So that's just information I can.
Yeah, and I think that's part of, so again, that's part of the benefit of being part of the conversation, because we can talk about that, right? And California is California. There's lots of districts in California, and they all can kind of choose to do their own thing in terms of this. Some of the, I did look into some of the Alameda County stuff. They have a billing department. I think it's even called medical billing department, and they have an email address. You want to email us at Alameda County Medical Billing Department, because that's what they're working with electronic health records, and that's the path they're going, and that's their choice. But we wouldn't have to generate our own electronic health records. We would have to share some information to be clear, but we don't have to share a record like that. Oh, and I listed it there: name, date of birth, gender, student ID number. Do they have an IEP? Well, and I didn't put it, but yes, also policy number in terms of insurance.
So are you suggesting they'll just be like files, like paper files that we'll use?
A spreadsheet. So that's what PCOE is looking at using, is just a spreadsheet with this information that we put in the right format and would be sent through, very much like we do with Medi-Cal billing, that goes through our third-party billing system. And then what they're doing is, because we don't actually even know which of our students have Medi-Cal, they take that and they match it up with Medi-Cal records, and then they send that off, and we get reimbursement based on that. But it would be a spreadsheet. All right, next slide. All right, we already talked about this: insurance copays and deductibles. And one more,
Is that, sorry,
Yeah.
is that solid though? Because
which,
the impression that the copays.
Okay,
the
can you go
impression I
back one,
have
Dave,
is
please?
that it's, right now, we're not planning to bill a copay, but we don't know. That's what I'm hearing. And so I just want to confirm with you.
right now, that's what DHCS is saying.
Okay.
Can they change their mind because they're still building the plane? Yes. Here's what I would say, and here would be my input if anyone asked me for it, which is I give it anyway, whether they ask or not. But this is what I would say to DHCS. If we had copays being charged, like let's just walk through this scenario. Johnny needs zones of regulation. I talked about that. And mom and dad say, yeah, Johnny's gets pretty hot and we don't know what to do. And we would really like it if he could employ those coping strategies. We'd love for him to be part of zones of regulation. I will sign that permission slip for him to be in this group. Awesome. Next question. Can we bill for Johnny to fee schedule? You have Kaiser, and Kaiser says we're going to charge you a copay. I have Kaiser. Why would I sign something to send to Kaiser and get a copay when I could not sign that and my child is still going to receive zones of regulation service, right? So I wouldn't fault any parent for that. You're going to provide my child with what we both agree was good for him and what I want him to have as a parent. And what I don't want is the extra $20 I'm going to have to pay to Kaiser. So if I don't sign this, I can have what I'm looking for without having to pay $20. So it really, I think, will start to negate the benefits of fee schedule very quickly if a copay is charged. I actually would argue that the high deductible plan may do that to us as well. PCOE is going to collect some data on that and see what it might look like over time. Like, how many students do we really have on these high deductible plans? I'll use myself as an example again. I have a Kaiser high deductible plan. So if my child was to receive something and build a fee schedule, there's no way we've met our cap. So they would never be reimbursed for the service to him, right? So yeah. So is the plane still being built? Absolutely. Could they change their mind? Yes. Is this where they're at right now? Yes. Yeah.
Right. So then if we don't get those two forms, the copay and the high deductible money, then we're much lower on the totem pole as far
How
as
beneficial
collecting
is it?
funds.
That's a question. Okay, so I'll leave it to questions and comments, but I will say this. Let me talk about those three options again, just to kind of frame your thinking. So you have three options. Yes, we move forward with cohort 4. You could provide direction on that. If we do that, we continue to participate in the consortium as we currently are, and the added layer of the cohort 4 with Department of Healthcare Services. That's where they're going to ask us to attend 2 hours per week of learn and also give us feedback. You could say, no, we don't want to move forward with cohort 4. And that leaves 2 options open to us. Are we still going to stay in the consortium? Yes or no with PCOEs are really the 2 options. PCOE in that MOU says that we agree as to a deliverable of applying to cohort 4. We've been in conversation with PCOE after our conversation on Monday. We are not the only district. If, as you can imagine, small districts like us have the same question. That's a heavy lift to ask us to do 2 hours a week. Could we stay in the consortium, provide feedback to you that goes to DHCS, continue to learn about fee schedule, not be in the cohort, but continue to learn and provide input so that when that time comes that they're flying that plane in 2026 or 2027, if they delay it, we could make an educated choice then about whether or not we want to onboard. What we miss out on in that opportunity is that early onboarding, you know, maybe a year early or so. But what we gain is the ability to have input without that added workload and still kind of learn alongside our peers to decide if we want to launch in 2026. So those are our 3 options. I'll take your questions and comments and provide you with staff recommendation when you're ready for it.
What are the risks?
What are the risks? The risk, I think, is that we bite off more than we can chew, if I'm being honest with you, Renee, right? Like, is this too much for our providers to take on? I would like to keep learning about it to really answer that question. So here's the way I will put it, and I've said this to other people that ask me, do I have an interest in making things harder for our staff in ways of making them do paperwork, in taking kids more class time away from their academics? You know, I have zero interest in that. What do I have a very vested interest in? Reaping the benefit of dollars for things we're already providing that can then enrich AUSD in different ways. So that's the balance we're trying to strike. And I think the risk is if we bite off more than we can chew and we make it very difficult for people, that creates its own problems that does not outweigh the benefits of a dollar amount. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it sounds, sorry.
No, that's quite all right. And then, so it also sounds like we're absolutely relying on parents at the beginning of the year to give us the information that DHCS is looking for.
Correct. Yes, they would have to give us their policy numbers, yeah, so that we could use it. Oh, and I didn't say this, but this is something that we've also talked about in the consortium. If we get to the point where we're onboarding to fee schedule, boards, you can write board policy, obviously, right? And there can be an option for you to write board policy about what you're okay with and what you're not okay with in terms of fee schedule onboarding, right? So let's say that electronic health record is still a maybe. You don't have to, but you can. And as a board, you say, we want to participate in fee schedule. We want to reap the benefits of these dollars that come in, but we don't want to be sending loads of information that are unnecessary. So we're going to spell out in a policy what we're willing to share and what we're not willing to share and how we're going to ask parents for that, right? Because, well, let me just give you an example. Parents will provide, in some cases, I'd have to look in ours, but sometimes when you ask for that beginning of the year information, parents will say, yeah, my child has Kaiser and here's my child's policy number. I fill it out on field trip forms all the time, right? You're going to the zoo. Yep, take my kid. If he gets hurt, he has Kaiser. Here's his policy number. I would be very uncomfortable with saying, oh, we'll just go to one of those forms and find your policy number, right? That feels sneaky. So what I would prefer to do is to say to parents, please provide us with your policy number when you tell us it's okay to build a fee schedule. That's the kind of stuff you can put in a board policy. So we're really clear and transparent with our community to say that we're not trying to do anything sneaky here. We're not trying to take your information and send it without your permission. We want you to know exactly what we're sending, how we're going to ask you if it's okay, how we're going to collect that information, and what exactly is going to the fee schedule for private insurance reimbursement.
Another side note on that, based on that workshop I was in at the CSBA, the DHCS was there along with CSBA giving this presentation, and they specifically said, if you do not have the child's healthcare information, go to their emergency card. They said that. And so that's the direction that we're getting coming down. That might not be what we do, but that's still the direction that this is headed.
And I think that scares people, right? And I will say, I've never worked in the Department of Healthcare Services, but I'm going to guess that the people in Department of Healthcare Services have also never worked in schools, right? And when you work alongside kids and their families every day, I think you see things differently than like, oh, that's an efficiency thing. Just go here and grab that and it's easy, right? They're trying to tell you, this is easy. You can get dollars for it. Onboard to our system. Give us feedback. We want to get it going. But we have to balance that. I think we have to go in eyes wide open, understanding as best we can what we're getting into, and then balance what we know is right for our families and for Auburn and for our kids with what we're hoping to reap out of what they're creating. Yeah. Amber.
Yeah, I want to just make sure, and because it sounds like one of the options you presented sounds like a low stakes way to get all the information. So you said option 2 of not joining the cohort, but staying in the consortium to give feedback, get information, and then there's no commitment to joining. We would only join if at that point we feel like whatever they've built we approve of and we're happy to use.
Right. We're saying we will stay on this train. Now I switched. It was a plane. Now it's a train, but we'll stay here and we'll continue to learn. And you're definitely going to get our feedback. And that consortium, by the way, if you are giving me information as the board about questions you have, that's a totally appropriate avenue for me to bring. And then PCOE can become a conduit to DHCS. And I had a conversation with PCOE exactly about that. And they said we would welcome questions because that's their whole purpose, is to try to build something that works as best it can for all of us and to have a voice in that process. I think it is fairly low stakes, right? Because there's a time commitment. That time commitment is honestly going to be me. It's going to be that 90 minutes continuing. And that actually makes me feel better. I'm not putting any stress on any other staff member. I know what I can do and I'm doing it now and it's working. But it allows us to collect the information and for me to bring it back to you. What we miss out on is early onboarding. That's probably something I'm willing to say is worth it to kind of stay in the mix and have an input without onboarding at this moment or prior to that state launch.
So what happens if we say no to cohort 4 with those MOUs and the whole ball of wax?
Yeah. So if we say no to cohort 4, PCOE will allow us to stay in the consortium. This was literally a conversation this week after we learned about all these things. They'll allow us to stay in the consortium. And what they'll do is we'll modify the plan. So they have to submit a plan on our behalf as part of the consortium to say what this is going to get a little confusing. So stop me if I'm losing you. PCOE is getting dollars and then they provide service. Remember we had that whole conversation. So the dollars they're providing service to Auburn through our wellness center. So that implementation plan that they're sending off to DHCS as part of cohort 1 to say how they're spending their money says in Auburn, we're using it for wellness. And to be part of this, Auburn is doing X, Y, and Z, participating in these 90-minute COPs and agreeing to onboard to cohort 4. We'll amend, not the MOU, but we'll amend the implementation plan to say we are not going to onboard to cohort 4. And I told PCB we can write language together, right? That we are not going to onboard to cohort 4. That's not our intention, but we will continue to learn. And down the road, like we're continuing to stay on the road with this multi-payer fee schedule, but we'll decide about whether or not we're going to fully onboard to that when we get to that point. There are no more cohorts that DHCS has out there. So, I mean, theoretically, if they came up with one, we'd have to have this conversation about cohort 5 or 6, but they have no more cohorts planned right now. So really what we're talking about is onboarding in one of those twice a year times that you will have available to it, starting potentially in 2026.
So nothing will change with the MOUs associated with this.
Yeah, basically what we're doing right now, we'll keep doing without and stay with PCOE on their journey with it, but we will not join DHCS directly through a cohort. Does that make sense? Yeah. And in case you're wondering, that's staff's recommendation in terms of how we move forward. I think it gives us a voice without biting off more than we can chew or jumping in too early.
Yeah, I like the option to learn about fee schedule. The first time you presented it, it really piqued my interest, you know. As someone who provides services to special ed and gen ed, I'm always feeling that tension of what in my service isn't even reimbursable. So I feel that tension. So I've always wondered like how else can schools provide these services without breaking their budget? So I'm interested in it, but I'm interested in a way that, yeah, it doesn't feel too fast.
Yeah.
And that last option seemed like a slow, safe, we still get to benefit from all the info.
So my concern with all of this is that we are building a healthcare system within our schools as opposed to educating kids, you know, ensuring that we have literacy. We're building a healthcare system. We're talking about billing for services that we provide that we are supposed to be providing. That's on us to provide it. I don't see this as, I guess, lucrative enough to take all these risks with the billing, the HIPAA. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a major company that provides these EHRs was hacked. 50 million kids. Personal information, their social security numbers, their grades, attendance, enrollment, their parents, their addresses, all of this was lost. And that they paid the hackers, they paid the ransom for this. And there's no guarantee that that information is not out there. I mean, you'd have to search for it, but this is what we're setting our kids up for, is exposing them to things like this. And I just don't see it as beneficial in this regard. I see that there is, but I think it's a great way to benefit. And as far as I totally understand why you want to get on the consortium and you want to learn about it. I think that's great. But I think that this is a slippery slope, and I think it's dangerous for our kids to engage in that.
I hear those concerns. I totally do. I also think we have a lot of systems that have all that information. Like, you know, we have all of our IEP records could be hacked in the same way. I'm not
No,
at all, like but I think being a part of the conversation and being able to give input is a way to you say the things that you just said in a place that is gonna make it matter.
Right, but it doesn't remove us from the process. It keeps us in there. And instead of us saying, no, we're not going to do this, we're going to protect these kids' information, we're going to find another way to solve these behavioral health problems, we're just going to kind of put our toe in the water and see how it goes. And I don't think that risking this is worth it.
So do you see participating and gathering the information at that level? Does that feel risky?
If we said no and it was completely severed, that's not what she's saying, I don't think.
She's saying we could do either, right? We could say no and sever it, or say no, but
I
just
just
stay
don't-
apart as an information gatherer.
I think we'll
and
get the
giver.
information. I think that we'll get the information, just not, and I think that you could probably still share the information. I just don't think it'll be like as easy to obtain, possibly. I think the information will still be out there, because my feeling on this is that the state and the county both want us involved. They're going to do what they can to keep you involved, to keep all of us involved and engaged in it. And so my feeling is you'll get the information that you want, and you'll be able to share the information you want because they want you involved in it. That's the way I see it. And I don't think that us establishing, you know, HIPAA within our schools is beneficial at all.
And
I
I sh-
mean, HIPAA's pretty straightforward, though. It just says you can't share people's medical information.
Well, that's true, but schools aren't clinical settings. Schools are a place to educate kids. They're not a place where you're supposed to send your kid to go get mental health care or any other type of health care. And that's what this is gearing up for. And so
And-
I don't agree that this is a good idea.
And I share the same concerns with you as well, as far as, we're merging two industries, healthcare industry and educational industry into one. And now's not the time to be doing that. For one, we're failing our kids academically. So we need to be focusing more on, the educational aspect. Now, if something like this might be beneficial down the road, we can join in on it. And to be, I understand you want to be part of building something and have an input. But right now we're rebuilding our district, and that's where we need you. We need you to have an input, and we need every second of that to be focused on our district, where we're at right now. We've come a long ways in a couple of years. And another thing I want to add is that this district has had a history of taking things on, hoping it'll turn out great, and it hasn't turned out great, which is, one of the reasons why we ended up, on the verge of receivership in the first place. And so, I think we're doing great right now, and we don't have the extra bandwidth, even if it's just a little bit, because I know how it is. It's like, I'm just gonna grow a little garden. It's just gonna be, 10 minutes a day. Before you know it, it turns into a project. You're so involved with it, and that 10 minutes turns into 30 minutes a day. And and we're doing really good right now, and we're on a good path right now, and we don't need any kind of bumps or hiccups. So I'm in favor of just moving away from this whole thing right now. And there's always an opportunity to come back, and we can focus on what we're here for. Is education.
Are they requiring all districts in 26, 27 to be a part of this, or are they giving the opportunity in 26, 27 to make a choice?
Yeah, good question. It's always a choice. No one's being forced to enter a fee schedule. So we would make a decision on whether or not we want to join, just like we're having the decision now about, or the conversation about joining cohort 4 or not, and what our path might be. We would decide whether or not we were joining fee schedule. And like I said, it'll be 2 times a year. So if you don't decide in August or June or July or whatever their month is, then you might have another chance in January. And I could see a benefit to letting it play out for a little bit and see, right? Speaking to Jason's point, I think Jason's point is right. In my kind of historical look back, there have been times where it's like, well, let's try it, or let's not try it. And it's a little bit, I don't know how else to say it, except like maybe a little bit fly by the seat of your pants, right? I think is your point. I want to be clear that I'm very much invested in not doing it that way, right? So these questions the information I gave you that came this week came because we're asking all these questions. And I say it's me and 1 or 2 other people that are all small districts. And based on past experience, right, that we've had, we say, okay, our question is, what does this look like minute by minute? Like, how much time do I have to stay on a Zoom, right? Are they taking it? I literally am asking, are they taking attendance, or is it recommended that we attend, right? Those are the questions I'm asking. So yesterday then PCOE says, okay, let us look into that for you. That's part of being in the consortium. Yesterday I had a call with them, and they said, okay, here's what it's probably going to look like. Here's what we're getting. That's how I got the 2 hours a week. I mean, that's not even maybe 24-hour old information that I'm bringing to you, because and that's why I'm saying to you, there were 2 choices and now there's 3, but we made that 3rd choice available to ourselves by asking the question. Because you're right, it's not okay to bite off more than we can chew. Because if I bite off more than I can chew and I'm giving time to that, I can't give time to a lot of other things that we know need to happen. So I want you to know we're very cognizant of that, but I absolutely agree with you that we should not be jumping into things unknown or blindly. And that's the reason why I'm asking a lot of these questions, to be as safe as we can.
So to that point, you said staff recommendation is to do the option to not join the cohort, but stay in the consortium. And can you maybe just give your reason for that as the person spending that time?
Yeah, and so what I can say is that's what we've been doing. So there's been some practice to that over the past 3 months or so, that make me understand the benefits of being part of that consortium and having input and realizing the information that can come back. My understanding of multi-payer fee schedule from when I presented it on the 24th of September to today has grown immensely. I can't even explain to you how much more I know about that. Part of that is from conversations also that I'm having with community, with our board members. People are bringing up points that send me down paths to do research that make it an educated decision. At some point, we're always taking a little risk when we try something new. That's just life. But we have to go into it as eyes wide open as we can and with as much of an educated decision as possible. And so I make that recommendation because I understand how much growth and understanding has come from the process so far. I can see that there may be a benefit, but I'll be honest, I don't know. If DHCS was like, here's your PPA, sign it today and jump on board, I think I would say, well, I know I would say no because there's no program manual. But even when there's a program manual, I don't know if we say yes to that yet. But I would like to learn about it and be part of that. And I do agree with Emily also that like there's a way for me to get that information, right? They do their presentations, they share them. No one's going to tell me they're not going to let me read them, right? And I have people in this community and this county that I call all the time to get their input that will be in the consortium. And I know they can give me the feedback. What I will miss out on is that real-time opportunity. So I don't know if you've met me, but I talk a decent amount. So I give a lot of feedback in these sessions. And part of the conversation we're having next time we meet in February is around my very first question I asked after our September or for October one, whenever the first time was. I need to know what these third-party billers are doing. I need to know what their systems are like. I need to know if they can roll over and run an algorithm on their end that, like I said earlier, that makes our providers have one thing to do, and then you take it from there, right? We tell you what we're going to provide that's reasonable, and then you spread it out. Because I can't have Lindsay Sprecher, our mental health specialist at Auburn sitting there with 2 computer screens and like, this kid has to go in this system. Then I have to, that's a waste of her time. Like, I don't have any interest in that. So that question is being answered, or that's the conversation we're having with third-party billers, including MBT. Because I also said, we use MBT along with a lot of other people. And then I listed the ones that nobody likes. Please don't bring them to the table. Can you bring the ones that we know work? Because Jeremy can tell you, we've tried a couple Medi-Cal billers and some are very difficult to work with. Can you bring the ones that we know work well with school districts so we can ask them these questions? And so that's what's happening at the next consortium. They're coming, we're asking them questions, and they're listening and building that machine that hopefully we can use and make it easier for staff. So that's why my recommendation in a very long-winded answer is
you-
that.
Do
So
you have estimated how much time you spent and other staff has spent up to this point on researching and putting things together and presenting and everything else?
yeah, well, I've definitely spent, 4 or 5 hours in conversation. I spend 90 minutes a month on this COP. I've done a couple calls this month. I mean, since December, I've probably spent 10 hours, I would say, since December. But that I would say December and January are really a lot of time digging into this because it's time to make a decision, right? So we're building that. Other than that, it's about that 90 minutes. I make it work. I do some of it on a Saturday. I mean, that's the truth. Like we talked Christmas break, right? So I do some of it on break.
Yeah.
But those things are me. And I'm a very honest person. If I couldn't take it on, I would tell you this is not a thing I can do right now. Right. And I think I said earlier to you tonight, like, here's the thing I've done and here's the thing I haven't done. Cause I'll be honest, I haven't gotten to that yet. Right. There's no time for that. And there's other things that take precedent. Yeah. So it's mainly me at this point. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but have you spent much time on multi-payer fee? We've talked about it a little bit, but. Oh, she helped me collect the data. Yeah. Yeah. At this point, given that it's still an investigatory stage, it feels like I'm the right person to keep it with. Staff have things to do, right? So I need to figure out, and that's my job as a superintendent, right? Like, what do we need? What's our path? Where are we going? What are some things that can help us with that? So it's been on me. I don't think there's been a lot of staff asks, other than Kelly's absolutely right. She did collect stuff for me.
Now, if
Greg?
down the line you decide, say we remain in the consortium, but not cohort 4, and down the line you say, hey, this isn't a good use of my time, are we able to withdraw from that at any point in the future?
Yeah, we have to let PCE know we're withdrawing from the consortium with the MOU by February, I think February 15th. It's a date in February, annually. So we would continue. But the truth is, like, they're willing to work with us. I think Emily's also correct in saying they want our input. I think that's true, right? There's not a lot of weight behind PCUE going alone, like to have districts with them to say, as a county, we're approaching it this way. There's power in that. And so, for example, they're willing to work with us. That MOU says we will join cohort 4, but they're willing to work with us and amend that so that we don't have to be in cohort 4 and can continue to provide input. So in the end, if in August we say, whoa, pump the brakes, I'm now spending 20 hours a week on this, it's something crazy, this is not manageable, we could exit at that point. The one thing we risk is the piece tied to that MOU, which I want to be clear about, which is funding for the wellness center in 26, 27. But again, it is not any educator's desire to leave kids high and dry. So, and they're not vindictive people. So I don't think they're going to say, you're going to stop doing the thing and tomorrow all of our counselors pack up their boxes and leave. Like, that's not going to happen. That's not what they're going to do to us. But we have to understand that that's part of the MOU, just for clarity's sake.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So as I hear this though, you think this is a good use of our time, at least to stay in the consortium, not necessarily in cohort 4. Because these supports these things that we are already doing, that this would help us get reimbursed for down the road. These are things that help build that, the bottom of that triangle so we can help support our students academically.
I agree.
So yes, academics are the priority, but this is helping us get there and prepare students to be able to learn.
Yeah.
So, so I'm in support with your recommendation of remaining in the consortium, but not cohort 4. So that's where I am at right now. I think doing that gives us that opportunity also to develop board policies proactively rather than reacting on the back end. So if we're not asking us to commit that time to it, we're going to be finding out things down the road. And I wouldn't be surprised if this does become a requirement at some point, just the way that things move in California. Maybe it's 10 years from now. But it certainly doesn't hurt us to be part of the process to develop it, ask these questions early, before it just comes down as an order and you shall do this.
I see where you're coming from, but I disagree with that. Because like I said, I think Brittany can get whatever information she wants to get from PCOE. And I think they're more than willing to share with her the same thing. So yeah, I would be in favor of not going forward, period.
And again, I'm not in support of the staff's recommendation as well. I think all time and energy can be better spent somewhere else. I appreciate your passion of wanting to be a part of something, especially at a ground level that may have the potential to be a good funding source for smaller districts. But I think just now is not the time. I think we need to stay the course of the way we're going.
Okay.
Clerk Crixby, where are you at?
It's frustrating because I feel like it just sounds like we're asking so much from parents, from staff, from you. And it's all for the unknown or the force of the state making us, basically. So it's hard. I feel like the more information we have, the better, so that we can say no down the line if we need to. And to stay involved with PCOE is obviously important. So it's a hard one. I feel like if we stay in the consortium, at least we can decide in August, no. Especially if it does, like you said, okay, now it's more than 90 minutes. Now it's 3 staff members. Now it's parents freaking out. Those kinds of things. if I could tell the state not to, maybe, but if we're forced, then I think the more time before we are in the cohort maybe would be better.
Can I ask you again, if we don't go forward, but you stay in the, we stay in the consortium, what is the difference between that? Is that the only thing? They're just allowing you access? Is that the only difference between not going forward and not going forward, but those?
You mean cohort versus being a cohort versus staying in the consortium of PCOE?
Yeah, the two no options. What is the difference between them?
Oh, so like if we said no to the cohort, what are the two options?
Right.
The options are exiting the MOU with PCOE completely and saying we're not going to join the cohort and we're fully getting off
Okay.
the train, right? Or we don't join the cohort and we stay in the consortium with that MOU. And we continue to be part of the conversation with PCOE. But both of those options keep us severed from the DHCS component, which we'd have to be part of the cohort for.
So, okay.
I'm sorry, let me ask really quick.
Go ahead.
Removing this MOU, is that removing the wellness centers portion?
That the funding is 26-27 through that particular MOU because PCOE is using funding from their DHCS cohort 1 participation to fund the wellness center in 2026. So yes, those dollars are tied to the consortium for next school year. So totally backing out of that MOU does put that funding source and then staffing of the wellness center at risk for 26-27.
So that's the main difference between
Yes,
the
in a
two.
nutshell, thank
That's
you
the
for
main-
summarizing.
yeah.
That is the main difference.
'Cause that funding is lost.
Yes. So if I'm hearing correctly, I think Greg, Renee, Amber, is it fair to say that option that we discussed about staying with the consortium as part of that MOU, but not moving forward with cohort 4 would be what you're asking for?
Yeah.
I know Emily and Jason are saying they'd prefer not to do that.
Well, I think there's
Correct.
more connected to it because now we're talking about the MOU portion of it.
Mhm.
So can you go over that with the rest of the board so they have a more clear
Yeah.
understanding of what that is?
Yeah,
Because
so
it's deeper.
okay, so the word that's used in the MOU is capacity grants. So when PCOE is participating in cohort 1 with DHCS, they are then asked as a county office to use their funding to build capacity within school districts around things that could potentially be billed to fee schedule. Wellness for us aligns with fee schedule, right? Because all the services that are provided within wellness fall within that 16-page document of fee schedule reimbursable services. So what PCOE said is we have a separate agreement with them for wellness centers through this school year. There's a funding source for that. Separate and apart from this school year, there's a funding source through this capacity grant building through their participation cohort 1 that they're using to continue our wellness centers for one more year in 26-27. So if we were to exit that MOU, we would exit the MOU, that's agreeing to fund our wellness centers in 26-27, and we would exit the consortium where we're providing information and all the stuff we've already talked about. Those two things are both in there.
So if we were to remain in the consortium, not the cohort, that would also give us a year to then develop another plan. If we're going to be getting off completely, then after the 26-27 school year, what are we doing to provide those supports that right now the wellness centers are doing, kind of develop what our strategy will be then in the district.
Yes. Stay tuned for my next
What
presentation.
what the funding source would be.
Correct.
Got it.
So, and we'll talk about this in the next presentation, but our wellness centers provide quite a bit to our school sites. So, and I want to be clear, it's always been the plan with wellness that these are short-term funding options that PCOE has had, with the idea that Auburn would sort of take this over, make it our own, and continue forward in whatever way that looks like, right? Now, we need a plan for that, and we can totally do that. I think we're incredibly capable people that can handle that, but we need a little bit of runway to do that. So an additional school year to figure that out and staff it on our own would be helpful. If it was to end in June, that's a bit of a fast turnaround.
But,
Emily?
but doable or
Probably not. So what that would entail is that if there were positions where I imagine that there are going to be positions we hire that don't yet exist in Auburn Union School District. And Sarah can tell you more about this, but if they were credentialed people within the union, we have to negotiate that, right? So we have to negotiate job description, we have to negotiate what salary schedule they fall on, all of that. Then we have to go through the process of posting, then we have to go through the process of hiring. All of that, I honestly don't know if we could get that done by August, maybe, right, at a brisk pace. However, the other piece is we have to build the structure that we slot all those people into to do the work. And that would be a big lift. What I would say instead is if we're going to take this on, we would spend next year working with PCOE, observing the wellness centers from a different lens than we observe them now, which is more of like a functional structural lens than like how we're implementing for students. Come up with a plan for that, work with Jeremy on the funding, work with AUTA on, or CSEA, depending on what the pistons are, work on the job descriptions, get them pushed forward to the board, really market this out to the community to say, this is what we're building, come apply with us. This is what we're hoping to do. Make sure teachers understand how, and school site staff understand how we're going to use our wellness centers. Is it going to look the same, different, or just tweaked from what PCOE is offering? I mean, there's a whole referral process. We'd have to build all of that so that people are ready to hit the ground running.
I would like to see a separate MOU on that because it was well over a year ago when the wellness centers came in and presented, and it was a pretty poorly presentation. No metrics, no tracking, no data, and they haven't been back since. And we have
Yeah.
no control over them. They, they're staffed by PCOE, which is very concerning. And if this MOU is tied to the wellness centers of additional funding, I don't see any reason why. And we can terminate this MOU and then we can move forward, because I think PCOE needs us as much as we need them. It's a partnership where we can craft a another MOU where we can have language in there of how we see the wellness centers to be, a better service to our schools.
Do you mean funding them in 2026 through a separate MOU not tied to the consortium and the capacity grants?
Well, right now, from my understanding, if we say, if this MOU goes, if we terminate this MOU, we lose funding for the 25-26 school year of the wellness centers. Correct.
Yes.
26, 27.
No. Sorry, it ends in 26. So he's right. It's 25, 26. But yeah, okay. So
25-26.
continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, but we can still terminate this MOU. Okay. PCOE still has the funding, and we can craft a separate MOU, a different MOU that's more tailored in how we would like to see the wellness centers, operate, within our schools. Because right now we have no control. We have no control over the wellness centers. They've been here for several years and they don't come to the meetings. They don't provide a report. I know we've asked them several times, but there's no direction, at least from us. There's no direction from us as a governing board, given somebody that's operating in our within our schools. Whether they're doing good, whether they're not doing good, that's not the question. I'm not bringing that question up. We don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So two things, I think. One, I think the other MOU, could we do another MOU? I mean, I don't have an answer to that. I'd have to ask. That's a maybe. It's unknown, because the dollars that are funding that are tied to the funding that PCOE is getting as part of DHCS's cohort 1. So if they have another funding stream separate and apart from DHCS, I mean, maybe they may. I just don't know, and we'd have to ask. So I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying that's a risk we're going to take, because I would just have to say, do you have another funding source to run these wellness centers for another year? And their answer could be yes, it could be no. I don't know the answer to that.
The funding's already there.
But it's tied to their grant with DHCS. So what they had to do was write an application to apply. And in that application, they had to say, here's what we agreed to do. And they agreed to work with LEAs like us across the county and help them work towards onboarding to fee schedule. And part of that is joining cohort 4, like we said, that's now come off the table, but also it's helping them build capacity. And the way they're helping us build capacity is by funding our wellness centers. So it is actually directly tied to DHCS and that MOU, if that makes sense.
No,
So it'd have to be a different grant source or something. And I don't know what they have to provide
It
that.
does make sense, but it's so deceptive because here we're talking about multi-payer fee schedule, but it's lumped into wellness centers. You know, they're two different things. And it's wasn't spelt out that way, but that's what we're finding out. It is. It's deceptive. It's deceptive down to the roots.
Well, and
They're
I
not
hope
coming-
it's not me explaining it the wrong way because I don't want to give that impression that I think they were trying to be sneaky or deceptive. Their obligation is to provide education to districts. Their obligation is to help build ways for districts to kind of test out this multi-payer fee schedule. So other districts have used other avenues, right? For us, wellness centers, we knew there wasn't a funding source past 2025. So this was a natural way to continue that because within there's 16 pages of what you can bill. Wellness centers everything fits on that fee schedule, right? So it was kind of a natural complement to it. And that's how we continued. I could have said to them, I mean, I want to be clear. I could have said, when we talk about how we want to, try this in AUSD, we don't want it to be wellness centers. We want it to be other schools are using it for, I don't know, different things. I shouldn't even make it up because I don't know, but they're using it for different things. But for us, it made sense to do something, we tie it to something we already knew and were using and would align with what the capacity grants we're talking about. So that may have been me explaining it incorrectly because I genuinely don't want to give the picture that they're being deceptive because I do find them to be very helpful partners to us. And when I have said to them, our goal would be to take this back and roll wellness centers forward with our own staff, because I hear you, it would be good to have a better understanding of that structure and support and hire people and have a voice in that process.
And that's the need we have in our district. Then we can bring in a behavioral health. We can bring those resources in where we're not outsourcing it, and we can staff someone like that full time. That's the direction we need to be looking on. That's what we need to be building, and not jumping on and partnering with something that has potential maybe to be great down the road. That's not going to help us. What needs to help us now, we need to focus on our needs now, of what we need now, and so that's where I'm at still, and I think there's other avenues that we can explore that we could spend our time on, and things that our district needs now.
Okay.
But it does sound like though that the funding that could come from multi-payer is what would be a funding source for these things we want to build. So building our own team of counselors and behavior specialists, we would receive reimbursement through that funding source.
But for the multi-payer.
Yeah, that would
But
be
we're
one
not,
way.
but we're not talking years down the road. How's that helping us this school year and next school year?
Well, what's helping us this school year is the grant funding from PCOE, and then giving us that year to start planning and developing our own system that will take over in the next school year. Just like the superintendent described, she'd be working on that, being able to negotiate and work with Jeremy to identify the funding for that program and build that up more deliberately. So we have a solid plan in place instead of trying to put something together and hope that it's prepared for the next school year.
Yeah, I'm still not seeing it. I'm still seeing it as a risk I'm not willing to get behind to take.
What is the risk? I mean, what's the downside that you're concerned about?
Well, the whole downside is that I mentioned in the beginning is that you have your educational system and you have your medical system, trying to merge into one. That's my main concern here.
that's just a concern, right? There's not any evidence that they're gonna merge into one. That's just one concern.
It's heading,
I
it's
would
heading in
also
that direction.
say, you know, educational systems partner with lots of different systems, like government systems.
Yeah.
In order just to have the funds to provide the services that our kids need.
No, this is not something I'm willing to get behind.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the superintendent?
Nope.
I don't think we need a motion. I think we just need, give you direction.
We just need direction,
But
yeah.
there's, depending on where we're at. So, I've said I'm behind the staff recommendation. There we go.
Can I add with that, especially as long as we are getting suggestions, goals, ideas for Wellness Center future?
Sorry, there's a question. Sorry, ask me that one more time.
Yeah, absolutely. Can that guidance of staying with consortium not in cohort 4 also be added to start the planning process for future of Wellness Center?
Oh, absolutely. You mean we probably start now, not next year, but start collecting information, looking at what that might look like to roll out in now 26-27 school year as an AUSD program. Absolutely, we could do that.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe we can have Wellness Center come and say hi.
Oh, and yeah, and I didn't say that, but we have talked to them about presenting in the spring. They're very aware of that and ready to do that. We were thinking March or April, whatever your preference is, you could tell us tonight even. And Kelly does a lot of work with the wellness centers in terms of communication. They provided a lot of the data you're going to see in my next presentation. So I know they're happy to come talk to you at whichever board meeting you prefer.
As long as we're on that, I know we kind of stepped aside for a sec. I really would just like to see some metrics. Give us some objective data to show us the value of the wellness centers, what they've done so far in our schools, and objectively, how have they improved student outcomes?
Notes of that about that, and yeah, okay.
And can you compare that with academic performance? Students who attend the Wellness Center, how their academics have improved by going there?
What I would say, maybe we'd have to look at that. What I would say is, what do you think about April? Because that would give us a couple months lead time to kind of dig into some of that and see what correlations we can make. Okay.
I would imagine that the comparative would be hard, and I only say that because I'll speak from my own experience. So working with kids who have significant behavior needs, I might see a lot of growth with their behavior goals, but they're still not at a point where they can make academic growth because they still have such extraordinary needs. So I just think or it could be that they do make like a ton of growth, but it does nothing to do with their behavior. Maybe they also got a tutor. So I think it would just be hard because there wouldn't be any way to control for other ways that they made growth other than wellness, right? Like it would just be anecdotal yeah, I don't know.
That may be true, but I think it's important to try and get some sort of picture of what's going on, because if we're not improving academics, then what are we doing?
No, I mean, I agree. I think looking at as many data points as we can, I just think like keeping in mind that it's just one, maybe correlation, not,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, we'll plan on April for that. And Kelly can work with wellness centers on putting something together with some metrics, and we'll dig into that a little bit between now and then. I just want to confirm direction from the board then is to remain in consortium, but not cohort 4 would be how we're moving forward. Correct. Okay. Thank you.
Do you want to take a break before your next presentation since you've been standing for so long?
Yeah, why don't we take a 5-minute recess, 5.5. It's 9:14. Let's be back at 9:15. Let's be back at 9:20.
Dave, wherever you are in the east, can you grant for me, please? This is like magic. You look, yeah, Dave, screen sharing. Dave is homesick, everyone, and he is at home clicking the buttons for us. So I want to say thank you, Dave, very much. We appreciate you and hope you feel better soon. Okay, another short topic to discuss, community schools grant. So you probably know that Auburn Union had a community schools planning grant about 3 years ago. That grant is, I think we've talked about it as part of interim report. It was $180,000. We're using it to fund some of our social emotional curriculum and things like that. We have an opportunity now to look at whether we want to go to the next step, which is community schools implementation grant. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. And again, we'll be asking for board direction on whether or not you want us to move forward with the grant writing process. The reason I'm asking you at this stage, to be quite candid with you, is that if we were to write a grant and have it accepted, obviously you'll be accepting the funds. And my interest is to know whether or not you have an interest in accepting those funds should they come your way, because I don't have an interest in spending my time writing the grant if we get the funds and they aren't something that you want to go down the path of. So that's why we're having a conversation tonight to get direction on the application process. All right, so community schools, what is it? California Community Schools Partnership Program, and it's going to be abbreviated throughout this presentation, CCSPP. This was established in 21-22. There's ed code around CCSPP and what it's for. But essentially it's to provide grant funding to address the changing needs of schools following the global pandemic, COVID-19. Obviously, we're out of the thick of that, but there were a lot of changes. I think any educator will tell you that schools look very different now than they did 10 years ago, let's say, in terms of the number of behaviors we see with students and the level of behavior that we see. So community schools have 4 foundational features that they're looking to support: integrated support services, family and community engagement. So a lot of input from families and communities about what they want to see in their school to help their child in their community. Collaborative leadership and shared decision-making, and extended or expanded learning time and opportunities. So these can be things that we do within the school day, but also things we can do outside of the school day. The goal of these grants is to assist schools in building these systems that continue beyond the grant period, which is a 5-year grant period ending in 2030. All right, next slide, please. So what are the eligibility requirements? CDE is prioritizing districts that received planning grant funding. Auburn, like I said, did receive planning grant funding 3 years ago. So we kind of check that box that we would be on a priority list. The other thing they look at is meeting one of these 4 criteria. And we meet the first one, which is 50% or more of pupils enrolled are considered unduplicated. Unduplicated students, I think we've talked about this before, but those would be English learners, students who qualify for low income, and homeless youth, right? Yes, the third one I always have to double check for some reason. Our school sites, and to be clear, these would be grants by school site. So we could apply for 1, 2, or 3. What I'm going to talk about is applying for all 3 schools, because I think there's systems that we would want to build continuity across our schools. All of our school sites are more than 50%, and Auburn L is our highest at 79%. And in the application packet CDE, and this is through CDE, they are prioritizing schools with 50% or more, but particularly schools with 80% or more. So Auburn L is right on the cusp of that at 79%. Next one, Dave. The funding levels are different based on size. Our schools all fall within the medium range, meaning we have a student count of somewhere between 401 and 1,000 students. That would mean that if given this grant, we would be awarded $300 per year for the first 4 years and $225,000 in the last year, for a total award per school of $1.425 million. And again, this is per school site, so we would be applying for that 3 times over. Next slide, please. I won't read these to you, but these are the permissible uses of grant funding. I'm going to outline the areas where we see a need in Auburn, which all fall within at least one, if not more than one of these bullet points. Go ahead.
And you can pick which things you want to use. So you don't have to do all of the things. You can decide what the priorities are for the district and use the funding just for those.
Correct. So the first bullet here is on staffing. And that staffing is not student support staff. That's on administrative staff for community schools coordinators and contractors to support with the work. Some school districts that apply for these funds hire a community school coordinator. What I'm seeing in terms of what's asked of the grant, I believe we can handle this in-house without hiring a coordinator. If that changes, we'll have to have, if that workload seems more, we'd have to have a conversation about that and amend the grant the grant parameters, which you're allowed to do annually as you start to learn more. But at present, staffing, for example, would it be something we're looking at from an administrative level? Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now what we're going to do is walk through the areas of need that we see in AUSD. So first and foremost, go ahead and click that slide for me one time, or there you go. So this is the same diagram you saw in the last presentation. I use this diagram a lot. It's hanging in my office, actually. I made it. It was a Brittany brainchild of like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. Because we kept talking about this word access, and it was like, but there's all these things, like what contributes to it? So here's the bottom line. We have to get kids to school. What you're going to see on the data slide in a couple of data slides here is that we have a real issue with chronic absenteeism, meaning kids that are absent at least 10% of the school year, which on a 180-day calendar is 18 days of school. That's a lot. No matter what we do, it doesn't matter if they don't. So we're going to look at things that address chronic absenteeism, and we're also going to look at social emotional plates, which are things that translate into behaviors, what we call maladaptive behaviors, things we don't want to see, because there's lots of behaviors we want to see in school, but the maladaptive ones are the things that get in the way of that green circle right there, which is access. So one more time, Dave, everything we'll be talking about will fall in these two circles, attendance and attendance and social emotional. But it should then positively impact the inside of the house as it increases student access. And I don't want to say, because this probably sets up the thought of, well, why aren't you talking about academics, right? We're thinking about a lot of things that we're doing to build our academic rigor and our academic programming. But what we're focusing on in community schools is that front side of the house to get them inside through that door. Okay, next one. All right, so let's talk about attendance data. Now, keep in mind, this is California school dashboard data. This just came out, but it's always 1 year in the rear. So this is 23-24 data. This is what our district chronic absenteeism level looks like. I will tell you it's not great. We're going to look at schools in just a second separately. It's a color system. So for chronic absenteeism, a lower number is better and that will make you blue, and a higher number obviously is worse and that'll make you red. They look at two things when they're determining your level. What is your percentage compared to last year? Did it get better? Did it get worse? And then what is that percentage overall? Unfortunately for Auburn, we're in red because we have an increase in chronic absenteeism from the previous year of 1.2%. And we have a fairly high chronic absenteeism rate of 30.6%. That means 30.6% of our students miss at least 10% of school. When we look at that along the bottom, if you can see those colors, we have the number 8 in red. That means we have 8 subgroups that are accounted for in our district, right? Special education, ethnic groups are represented there. We have 8 different groups that we have enough students to count in, and all 8 of them fall into the red category. Okay, one more time, Dave. If we look individually by school, we'll see that all 3 of our schools also fall into the red, and they have relatively similar chronic absenteeism patterns in the high 20s to the mid 30s. And unfortunately, again, each of our schools increased in chronic absenteeism over the course of last school year. Go ahead and one more time, Dave. So then we ask this question, well, what does that look like when we look at attendance boundaries? Are all of our kids absent all the time? Do we have chronic absenteeism widely spread across our attendance boundaries, or are they centralized? And so this is actually data that the state doesn't give us. This is another Brittany brainchild project where I was sitting with PCOE. Jake is the guy. He's he always says, I'm like Jake from State Farm. That's how you're supposed to remember his name. But Jake is the data guy, and he said to me, and now I think he wishes he didn't say. He said, if you want some kind of data, just tell me. I can do anything. And I said, here's what I want. Have you ever made a heat map? I want a heat map. I want to know where these kids live, where this like chronic absenteeism it lies. And so what we see, and again, keep in mind, this is last year. So Evie Kane was still in middle school. EV Kane and Auburnell have a pocket of chronic absenteeism that lives just above that where it says North Auburn there. And then Skyridge has a pocket of chronic absenteeism that kind of lives along a line in the center of their attendance boundary. Everywhere you see green, that's where kids live and attended those schools, but their absenteeism is, well, their attendance is great, right? They might be sick 1 or 2 days, but nothing really concerned. They're in the green. You'll also notice that we have green dots that go out really, really far outside of Auburn, and those are our kids that are coming to us on inter-district transfers. And the funny thing is they live really far away, but they're coming to school, and that's part of what lets them keep their inter-district transfer. So their attendance looks really good as well. So what does all of that tell us when I start to sit there and synthesize all of that data? Go ahead, Dave, one more time. What we see on there is that we need a couple of things. We need some community outreach in those hotspot areas because I want to know from people, why is it that we have high chronic absenteeism in these areas? And that's part of community schools. We need to reach out and engage with communities and ask them, what is it that's prohibiting you from getting your child to school every day on a regular basis? And then we also have to look at potential support avenues. And what I think we've been investigating and I think may be helpful is to look at potential bus routes in these pocket areas, not widespread bus routes across Auburn. That's not something that's probably going to be doable for us, but to say, if we were to run 1 or 2 bus lines, where would we run them? We'd run them in those hotspot areas. So those are the things that we want to then put into the next part here, community school grant proposal. So what we would look at is next year, this year, we would do community outreach this spring to identify areas of need, outreach to our transportation partners to investigate bus routes, costs for those bus routes. And then in 25-26, we would roll out this transportation plan that we would develop this spring and have an ongoing conversation around additional supports, whatever comes out of those community conversations. They may tell me something I'd never thought of, which is the point of having the conversation. And then we'll kind of revamp that as time goes on over this 5-year grant period based on community need. So that's attendance. Next one, Dave. All right, so what about behavior? Here's another area we really need to look at. Oh, let me pause for 1 second. I do want to be candid. The transportation ask is a stretch. It fits within community schools, but I will say that if we are to submit this grant application, that is the one area I could see the state saying no to the busing. In which case, Jeremy and I'll figure that out. We'll keep working on it. It might not look like 2 routes. It might look like 1, but we'll keep working. But if we are to apply, I'm going to try. Is the bottom line. So for that is.
Yeah, if they said no to that, could potentially we use that funding to cover something else we're already doing and free up that money from our general fund?
Well, potentially, but there is supplant and supplement language in community schools grants. So they don't want you to supplant things you're already doing. They want you to supplement and increase. But there are definitely needs we're having that I think will fit within that will still be an increase, but wouldn't necessarily, but wouldn't be transportation. Yeah. Okay, so behavior intervention data. So now let's look at this. So one more time, Dave. When we look at office discipline referrals, those are put into a system called SWIS. If you have ever heard that, that's our data system that tracks our office discipline referrals or ODRs. And this is part of our positive behavior intervention and support program, PBIS. So PBIS both clarifies expectations, rewards kids for doing the right thing, but has a systematic approach to how to address it when kids aren't doing what we expect of them. So an office discipline referral, it happens. Kids are kids. They're going to get a discipline referral sometimes. What we're looking for is that the majority of our kids are getting 0 to 1 referral. Some might be getting 2 to 5, and a small population might be getting 6 or more. Those are the kids that would kind of be our high flyers. So actually hit it for me 2 more times, Dave. So thank you. So 0 to 1 and these are all 3 of our schools combined together taking their SWIS data. 88% of our students are doing pretty good. They get 0 to 1 referral. And this was data collected January 7th or 8th, first week of school, up until that point. 2 to 5 referrals, 8% of our students receive 2 to 5 referrals. That's probably in that area we would expect of somewhere around 10% of our kids. And then 3.5% of our kids have 6 or more referrals. When you look at that data source, it looks like Auburn is right on track with where they need to be. You have some kids who have higher needs, some who have, and most kids don't have a lot of behavioral concerns or need. But looking at multiple data sources is important for a reason. So we're going to look at some multiple data sources. So go ahead and one more time, Dave. So what I then did, or I should say Kelly, I should not take credit for this. Kelly reached out to all our counselors, and we had not asked them to collect this data, to be clear. So we had to ask them to kind of think back over the last few weeks, and then make an estimate for us over the course of a year. How many times have you, as the school counselor or mental health specialist, been pulled for behavioral dysregulation that rose to the level that they needed another adult to help intervene? This looks like elopement, like kids running potentially into the street, things that are really dangerous, intensive disruptive behavior, clearing of tables, stuff where you have to exit kids from the classroom because it might be dangerous. Go ahead, Dave. On average, they self-reported that for the first half of the year, they were called for this about 80 times when they were taking the last week or two and then multiplying it out. So what I want to say there, go back for 1 second, Dave. What I want to say there is that I think this speaks volumes when you look at two data sources to say we don't have a lot of kids who have these 6+ office referrals. But what we do have are those 3.5% of kids have a lot of need. It's well beyond 6 and it's high levels of need. So there is data to support that we need to do something else, because our counselors and our mental health specialists, and this doesn't count how many times psychs were pulled, the speech and language pathologist, the principal, right? This is just one group of people. They're spending a lot of time doing this work. Amber?
And I know it was either last year or the year before, I was on the PBIS team as a parent, and a lot of the conversation was around underestimating ODRs because just the training needs still for all the different staff members who could write them, and them understanding when they needed to write an ODR, and also understanding what type of ODR to write.
Yeah.
So I always question, even when we were on the committee looking at the numbers, everyone was like, these numbers seem lower than actually what the behavior that's occurring on campus.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
just another.
Yep.
Yeah. Thought.
Yes, I agree with you. And I want to be clear that when that first set of data is collected at 88%, 8%, 3.5, it's only counting that kid once. So if that kid falls into the 6+ pot, they get counted as one student, but they could have 6, they could have 10, they could have 12, they could have 25 ODRs. So that's why we have to look at multiple data sources to really see what's happening. Okay, next slide, Dave. Okay, so what does that tell us? We know that there's a need for some behavioral intervention, but we have to do that in a structured way. And Sarah brought this up, I think, at last board meeting when we were talking about the dollars we're spending on behaviorist support. When we looked at this summertime, Kelly and I, we looked at the behavior data we had in the summer and said, we don't need a full-time behaviorist based on the data we had in front of us, based on the number of FBAs and what we're seeing and all of that. And maybe what you're saying, that ODRs are underrepresented or underreported. We saw a need for a part-time behaviorist. And so we hired a part-time behaviorist. And what we learned very quickly once we got into it is that we may have had some data, but we didn't have enough data to make that decision. In hindsight, we would have made a different one, right? And so we have a need, I think, for a full-time behaviorist in this district. So what we would put in this grant is the development of a behavioral team to support a couple of things. Data collection. We have teachers collecting data right now. That's not where they need to be spending their time. I would also argue, again, do they know how to collect that data correctly? That's not saying anything bad about teachers. That's just not their wheelhouse, right? So we need people who can collect that data, can then roll out appropriate interventions. So have the training and understanding to recommend an intervention, and then provide professional development to that teacher who will do some of that work, right? Because that isn't a teacher's wheelhouse, giving positive reminders or how to redirect. But we need a person who can tell them how to do that the right way. And we also need, and this is very, very important, and this is something I think we see a definite need for, we need fidelity checks, because fidelity checks tell us if we're doing the thing we said we were going to do. And a lot of the data that we're collecting and then making choices about or from, we're not asking that question first. And so we need to make sure that we have that in place. And the best way to do that is to get trained people in place to help with that. So what our hope is that we would onboard a full-time behaviorist. We call that one FTE or one full-time equivalent. We would do that next school year. And that person would learn about Auburn, go across all of our sites. It would give us more behavioral support than we have currently. And they would help us to spend that year planning a team approach to behavior that would 26, 27. And what that would look like in my mind at this time, but of course, we're going to take input from the behaviorists and from the teachers who are participating in this across their school sites, is that we would potentially have one registered behavior technician. So that's a classified position. And again, that's a classified position we don't have. So we'd have to go through the process of creating those job descriptions and working with the union. But we would get one RBT per school site whose job would be to work on that data collection, fidelity, professional development under the supervision of that. An RBT cannot work alone. They have to work, Amber can tell you this, they have to work under the supervision of a BCBA. So that would be kind of the rollout plan over 2 years, and then we would continue that into 2030.
So as we're looking at bringing
Yeah.
in staff with this grant, do you have a timeline in mind for when you would be developing a plan for how to fund these positions after the grant expires?
Correct. So a good question. So first and foremost, when we hire on one-time funding, we hire with the very wide open information to the applicant that this is a temporarily funded position from one-time monies. So we would be telling them that it's a temporarily funded position through 2030. However, as we move through this process, our goal is to work on, well, let me say it this way. We have two avenues to bring funding in or to balance our budgets, right, in education. We can bring in more students through enrollment, but we don't have a ton of control over that. Or we can make sure we don't send as many dollars out. We have a lot more control over that. So what we're really looking at mainly here are cost saving measures. And a lot of those cost saving measures are around what we're trying to do to streamline processes. Our biggest contributor in the budget right now where we see cost savings is in the world of special education. And so we're cleaning up some of the things that we're doing there. We've already seen some cost benefit from that. Not enough to amount to this full grant amount, which for all three schools would be $900,000 a year. But with a 5-year run, could we get there and build that pot along with some things that are changing in the budget? You know, as recent as the January 10th budget that was released, those are all things we'll figure out over that 5-year run. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I keep asking Jeremy, does it feel possible? Like, I think there is a path forward with that, with the cost savings that we're doing and what we see happening coming down the line, but.
Yeah, definitely it's possible. The state keeps giving us, one-time monies because we don't have the students in California and they still have to fund Prop 98, which is, local control funding formula. And they have to keep funding that at a level that they can't spend with the amount of students in California. So.
And I know just like we don't have control over how many kids we get, we never have control over what kind of students, we're serving, but I'll speak from a behaviorist perspective. We're always trying to work ourselves out of a job. And so the goal is to build really robust systems that teachers and everyone's using so that you don't then need that one expert to tell you to do it, right? So that would also be a goal is we don't want to be a district who needs a BCBA.
Correct. And at some point you'll always need a BCBA, right? I mean, I think that every sped person will always tell you, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. And I think that is very true. But the truth is they'll always have kids with needs. But could we get to the point where you don't need 3 RBTs and that whittles its way down? And hopefully we could do that through attrition, right? Like in that 5-year span, we have someone and they come on and then they move or they retire or whatever happens, then we don't rehire for that position. So I don't want to set it up like, oh, we're going to hire these people and we're going to lay them off. That does nobody any favors. Nobody wants to have that happen. That just severs relationships. So we want to be very honest that they're temporary positions. But also if we see through this process that we don't need all of those positions, we can start to whittle down through attrition would be the goal. Did I answer that question? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So now let's look at some wellness center data. This is usage data as of December. And this is something Kelly helped collect. So you can see all 3 school sites are each a column. You can see what wellness centers are offering in terms of usage on the left. So running small groups, what small groups have they held? And those are some examples of them. 4, 2, and 2 across the school sites. This is again through December. What individual service are they providing to some gen ed students? You can see that, pretty small numbers there. I'm going to skip walk-ins for a second. Classroom presentations. So that's going in regularly and helping teachers who are maybe new to it or need help with, say, toolbox lessons on coping strategies and our social emotional curriculum. calls for behavioral dysregulation, I'll get to in a minute, and then risk assessments. Those would be kids who have like self-harm risk that we're responding to in an emergency situation. So now let's look at, click the button for me twice, Dave, please. Let's look at these two areas. So calls for behavioral dysregulation response. That, remember I said that our counselors and mental health specialists self-evaluated that they have done this about 80 times over the course of that first half of the school year. Wellness is tracking how many times they're responding, and it's 80, 149, and 143. So you need to add that to the number of students that are counselors and psychs or counselors and mental health specialists are responding to. And then that walk-in number is very high, right? And they time this. Kids are only allowed to stay for so long. They have to log in so they can track what students are coming when, and do we see a pattern, all of that, right? Those numbers are very high. And some of that is good. There's actually a practice called breaks are better because it allows kids to take a break and come back within 10 minutes and re-engage in class instead of escalating and causing a bigger problem. But we also know just from anecdotal data that some of those walk-ins are because those dysregulation behaviors that are happening from other students are causing other students in the class to say, I need a break. And so we're seeing those breaks increase, some of those breaks going to the wellness center because they're having a building response to students who are having something bad in the classroom. So all this is to say, we utilize our wellness centers quite a bit. And even with our own staff, they're still doing some of this work as well to help. In consort with behavioral support and all the other things we've talked about so far, we're hoping that this can help to stem some of that flow and these high numbers. Yeah, great.
Anonymously, but do we have a way of seeing how many students, unique students are using like the walk-in? You know, 12 students, they're providing 1,000 of the walk-in.
Oh, yeah. Well, they collect student name, correct? So I think we could share that data source to say we have this many walk-ins and that accounts for 275 students, or I think, is that what you're asking for?
Essentially, I mean, how many of these are repeat customers?
Right.
Yeah.
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 And I think that's a good information. We can break the data down that way too. Yeah. Okay, next slide, Dave. All right, so now we're on to, and we've already talked about this, right? And I think we all kind of have an understanding here that if we want to continue our wellness centers, we need to do that. We need to pick that up after 2026. And that gives us, there's some benefits to that, like we've talked about already, but we do see a need for them given the data. So what would we do? If awarded this grant, our goal would be that in 25, 26, we would continue to work with the wellness centers. And this is sort of what we already talked about, right? On integration into and into our site-wide systems of support, right? So we're all kind of pulling from the same oar and working together. Continue that work and then use that time for some planning and implementation, working with our labor partners for collaboration, for hiring, et cetera, and work towards running our own district-run wellness centers beginning in 26, 27. And then we would just roll those out towards the end of the grant. We'd work on some of these revenue streams, meaning not revenue streams, excuse me, fewer dollars going out so that we had enough money along with these one-time monies and stuff that are coming to continue these things after 2030 would be the plan. Next slide, Dave. I think we're almost, oh, and then these are things I just wanted to throw in there. I don't know if they're necessarily part of the grant per se, but they have been mentioned by our community. And so we also want to address these whether or not it's through the grant. Before and after school tutoring with a bilingual tutor has been asked by our ELAC committee, which is our English Language Learner District, or DLAC, District English Language Learner Committee. Also from that same group, increased library hours for access to materials for students. And then staff feedback are on investigating additional options for after school sports transportation. We run into a few roadblocks there. I will be totally candid that we did contemplate vans. We looked into that. There are some intense requirements in terms of insurance. And then in June of this year, there's additional things that come our way if we have staff run vehicles, like regular drug testing of staff and just systems we don't have set up. So it's not our intention at this point to investigate vans, but we do want to investigate other options to make sure our kids can get access to the after school programming like sports. All right, I think one more, Dave. We might be to, oh, I lied. Oh, I forgot. We have to go through I thought we were to questions. I was ahead of myself. It's getting late. Okay, so what the heck are the requirements? Now we're back to what's the workload on staff. I will say this one in terms of what grant requirements are is not a huge heavy lift. So there's annual reporting requirements. That's fine. I think that's totally appropriate. If we weren't telling them what we were doing with the money once a year, that I would wonder why. So we have to give them an expenditure report, which is our budget, an implementation plan. So tell them what we've done so far. And then this also makes sense to me. We need to publicly present that, right? So we bring that to a board meeting, informational, so that you can also see what we're doing and the public has a chance to listen to that as well. Beginning in year 2, they asked for a sustainability report. So this is what Greg was asking about a minute ago. How do we plan to continue to fund this beyond 2030? So we'll start doing those sustainability reports. And then at the very end of the project, they just asked for an end of project expenditure report and end of project outcome report. So we'll have metrics we're measuring and we'll just do an end of 5-year report on that. There is professional development provided by CDE. And just like last time, I reached out to what's called our RTAC, our regional office or regional group that helps with community schools grants, and talked to them about what would be required for that. Right now, it looks like monthly requirements, which is much more doable. There's a community of practice that's they're very common in these things that will happen monthly at the state level that we would participate in. And those are an hour long. And then there's monthly learning in 3 different streams with RTAC that are divide and conquer, but not all of those are required. So for example, we would have a district coordinator, one that we would go to. And then because these are site led, our principals or site team would attend 1 hour a month as well. So we basically different people are attending 1 hour once a month for 3 different meetings over the course of the grant. And that I think is it. I think we're to questions. Oh, I'm going to have to pull, this is so embarrassing. I'm going to have to pull my thing out. Okay. So next steps. So what do? So we have to decide, and this is from the board, what your direction is on whether or not we want to apply. It also is cohort 4, different cohort 4, it just happens to be the same number. But we have to decide whether or not we want to apply. That's due by February 7th. We would then submit those grants. We would be notified in June or July on whether or not we received those grants. We would then bring them to you as the board for acceptance at whatever board meeting follows the letter coming to us. They would disperse funds in August and each subsequent August thereafter. And then we would be implementing starting in August 2025, rolling through to June 2030. And then we would work within our community during the grant period to identify ongoing funding from the annual budget that we could use to continue some of these things as long as they were still supporting our students and helpful to our community. And now I promise I really am at questions. There we go.
Good, thorough presentation. I mean, my only real hang up really is just in the title, community schools grant. There's a lot of stigma that kind of comes with that. There's a lot of baggage behind community schools. But what you're looking at using these grant funds for seem like a great use for those sorts of funds and a good opportunity for the district.
Is this connected to the Wellness Center grant MOU?
No, it's not
So
connected.
This is not connected to any MOU then.
No, this would be us on our own. So, but I have talked to PCOE and told them like our goal would be to take this back. And PCOE, RTAC, PCOE sits on RTAC. So talking them to about like one of our goals would be to write wellness centers in here to take that back and have it be our own staff. So they understand that's where we're going. And my questions to them leading up to this were like, we need to sit alongside you and learn these things and build a structure, and they're open to all that. So we've been in conversation, but it's separate from them. This will be just for us.
I did like what Amber was saying about kind of breaking free from it, like you work yourself out of a job. And I wonder how we could make sure we have that direction, that that's our goal.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of that. I think what we do is we're constantly looking at data sources to drive. Data sources are what's driving our C for the need, right? So when those data sources change, what flows from that is our needs change. And it's not our intention to continue to spend money in places that it doesn't benefit our kids, right? So we're going to transfer those funds somewhere else. The kind of difficult part about that is sometimes those dollars are tied to people. And so we have to be really have a lot of forethought into what we see coming so that we can start to whittle down to what's appropriate. And I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again because I think it's so important to think about. if we know down the line that we could potentially do this work with 2 RBTs and not 3, and one of them is going to retire or move away, then we need to be really cognizant of that, and we're not going to repost for that job, because the best way that we're going to cut down on staffing is through that attrition piece, so that we don't have to have a reduction in force layoff notice, which is what we all want to avoid. So then, and that's where most of our money is going to be spent, right? Is on the people doing the work. So we'd use data to drive that, and then really have a lot of forward thinking thought about what we're going to do with staffing so that we can reduce through attrition.
And do we have outcomes we're looking for? Like, do we have goals set and
Yeah, that would be
metrics we
part of
wanna
this.
meet in order to kind of ramp down?
Yeah, 100%. So we have to decide what those data sources are. We'll use things like, we could use things like our chronic absenteeism numbers, what comes out of the dashboard. We could use behavior referral data. We could decide, hey, we need to start collecting data on X and use that as a driver. Special ed referrals are probably going to be a huge piece. Number of FBAs, which are functional behavior assessments. As those come down, you start to see less of a need for that behavioral support. Those are things we would build in and track on an annual basis.
And I think asking that, whoever that behavior specialist, because PCBAs love data, it's all about like data. So asking them like, what's the best
Mhm.
way to see that we're making progress?
Yeah.
And having them create that.
And
layer
I
to
think
data.
that's a really good point, because part of this, if you'll notice, is that we're going to slow roll some of these things. So like we'll hire the behaviorists, but we're not going to hire the RBTs yet, because they're going to be standing there saying, what do I do? And we're going to say, well, we're building it. We'll tell you in a minute. So we'll bring the behaviorists on board. We'll have them help us and give us their expertise in building that system, so that when RBTs come, we have a solid plan as to what their role is and what their job is.
And I'll say too that in other counties, they have like teams of BCBAs who part of their job is to constantly look for more grants, appropriate grants, but they're trying to keep their services funded. So that's also just something I've noticed as a trend that I didn't used to notice, that they're heading up some of that work.
I think ideally you would try to downsize rather than grow
Mhm.
the behavioral health within the school.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal would be not to, for the need not to be there.
Mhm.
That would be the ultimate
Yeah.
goal.
Right, and I
Yeah.
think that there are a lot of things that we can incorporate that don't necessarily need to be built on a mental health system within our school.
Mhm.
I will say behavior is not a mental health system. I will say it's like a skill, just like reading, writing. It's definitely, I think of behavior as skill development.
And kids come to us with very different expectations, right? Everybody's home's a little bit different. You know, what words are appropriate to use, when you use your hands and when you don't, if you run away or stay put, or, you know, so I agree with Amber in that sense, that like, it's also a teaching aspect. And so some of this work will be around that for sure. Yeah.
So I wonder if we can do it without the behaviorist aspect, if we can build the structure within the schools of, expectation and consequences. If we could build that without building this system inside the school.
I think what you're asking for is what a behaviorist can help us with, though, because those data sources and the building of it, I think there's a need for that. We have a lot of skilled people who do PBIS and all of that, but those kind of 80 pullouts, you know, by mental health, and then another 100 and whatever it was at Skyridge by Wellness Center, is telling us that kids are having really big behaviors, that you need someone with a very specific skill set to help you parse out and figure out what to do. And once we start to do that and people start to learn the systems, they can then implement those systems again on their own, right? A teacher can say, oh, I learned how to do this, and now I can do it again for this kid I had 2 years later that has a very similar thing going on. But that starting point of teaching them that and observing and collecting data, that's what behaviors really do. And
Well,
so that's where sorry, go
And
ahead.
please correct me if I'm wrong, but a behaviorist to having that intervention can help prevent misidentification or over-identification for IEPs.
100%.
So where something we can look at is a behavioral issue, without that behaviorist piece there, we might be looking at and identifying for ADHD or anything else that isn't necessary. And then we are kind of mentally health, we're tracking that kid in the mental health program or doctor's visits, all the rest down the line if their parents go that way.
Yeah.
Those behaviors can help us identify when it's still just a behavioral issue and teaching them how to.
And not a learning disability.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Thank you.
agree.
I think it's difficult, especially if you haven't been in school in a while and aren't in schools regularly to really know how different it is. Like it's so different. So while before just putting in expectations that were clear and maybe some consequences around if you didn't follow them was enough, that's not the landscape anymore. And so there's classrooms that have really well managed and have clear expectations, and still the kids don't have the skills that they need to tolerate all kinds of different things or to handle their emotions or to ask for help when they need help. I mean, I could go on and on, but
I know,
it's just
but
such a different landscape.
I understand that, but my feeling is that when we've got wellness centers, when there's like 3,800, breaks being taken over the course of a trimester, we're not telling kids, this is the expectation, you should behave this way in class. We're telling kids, go ahead and walk out. When you feel better, come back in. And that's disruptive to the entire class, to their own education. It's just like, in my opinion, it's creating a romper room effect as opposed to giving consequences for poor behavior. And so I want to
think
see
that-
things, I want to see things managed in a way that we are tamping all of that down, where we're not having kids take a walk or take a break, where they understand that this is how life is. Some things are uncomfortable. You have a test that you have to take and it's uncomfortable. You don't know how to do the work. But that's something you have to manage and learn. It's a skill that you have to have in life, to have disappointments and to feel uncomfortable in situations. And I think that we're taking that away from kids by letting them just walk out whenever something doesn't feel good.
Well,
And so that's
sorry.
something I'd like to see
Can I ask a question?
managed.
I mean, because the truth is, we can tell certain kids, no, you can't leave, and then they're still going to leave. And then they might leave for an hour versus if you say, hey, go walk up to the office, talk to someone, come back, and then they're back in class within 10 minutes versus then they've been out of class for an hour. And then you might say there's a consequence. But then we're dealing with maybe like families where that consequence isn't meaningful. Maybe the consequence is they don't get to return to school the next day. Oh, amazing. I want to be at home.
If I could interject, I think some of these things too that behaviors then provide would be giving some of those tools and help train staff on that. So say we have the kid who we identify as, all right, this person's probably going to try to bolt, but I can ask them to run an errand to the office, right? Like that could be something that is taught because now the kid runs the errand, they get out of the class, they hit that reset button instead of escalating those behaviors and then walking out to the wellness center or whatever else. So the goal, I think, of having behaviorist support there is to prevent, so many, the 3,800 or 4,500, however many it was, walkthroughs to the wellness centers. The goal is to bring that behavior down.
It's to build the tolerance that you're talking about. Because what you're talking about is kids not being able to tolerate when things don't go their way. I mean, that's a piece of it, right? And a part of that role is to teach the skill of toleration, which doesn't, again, I get it, doesn't seem like something we should have to teach anymore, but it absolutely is.
I just want to, I guess I want more information on, are we going to be able to direct the behaviorist department or, whomever to follow what we're looking for? Or is it just, now we have another person and they're the person dealing with it, as opposed to, here's the direction that we want to give. This is our goal. This is what our end game is.
Well, that would be the superintendent setting those goals and parameters with the site staff according to what direction we give the superintendent when we go establish our goals, like we're going to be doing next month. So
And all employees have an evaluation process and they all have a supervisor. So that behaviorist is not an administrator. So they will have a supervisor that oversees that what their work product is. And we're clear with their expectations about what we want them to do, right? That's what we're doing with kids, right? Here's what you're doing. Here's what we're asking for. Here's your schedule. I mean, we're building all of that with their input, but certainly with them. And their supervisor would likely be Kelly. That would be the appropriate person right over student services. It could even be me, but it's going to be one of us in that ed service realm, not even a principal, because that person is going site to site. So they're going to have a district level administrator overseeing them. They'll be required to do goals. We'll check in, we'll do observations. We'll be looking at some of those data sources and collecting feedback. So certainly we'll be directing their work.
So maybe I can ask you, when you go in and do this work, you're given direction on what the outcome the pool is looking for, or you're just like trying to manage this moment?
Well, ask me more. What do you mean by it? Like, what would an
Like
example be?
overall, like when you take the job and you're like, I'm working at this school now, are you trying to teach these kids like these are some skills that you need, and ultimately you should be in class every day and we shouldn't be meeting? Like, is
I
that
mean,
what your goal is? Or
That's mine. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
have you been given that direction from your school or your?
I guess the reason it's tricky to answer is because a behaviorist goal is to identify why the behavior is occurring and then what skills the kid needs to ultimately be in class, right? Like, so that's what you're doing
Sorry,
every
yes,
day,
okay.
right? So I don't know that a school would have a different goal than that. I think the alignment piece with each school is more around like what's the culture of behavior and like what does the school already have in place in terms of like expectations and how the kids are taught to meet the expectation, and then where I'm stepping in and where I'm not. So that's more of the direction is like, am I only stepping in when it's a kid turning over desks, or am I stepping in because a kid's out of class too much? So that's the kind of direction you would look for. But I think I see what you're saying.
I'm just, yeah, you said, work yourself out of a job.
That's
That
all
sounds like it's your goal, but I'm wondering like, is that specific direction you've been given, or is that just how you see your?
Well, I can say it this way. The direction more is you don't want to, for example, I'm not going to recommend an extra adult or an aide for every single kid, for example. Like there might be direction around that. But I think the broad direction is always how do you meet the student's needs? And so then it's hard even for a school to give the kind of direction of, I don't want you spending X amount of time out of class, because the behaviorist who's with that eloped child might say, you need to return to class. And then maybe the kid does. Like, I mean, I can tell you today, I was with a kid out today because he was lunging for the teacher, going to hit the teacher, and had already tried to break her car window. And I was like, we're going on a walk. Right. And so that walk took 35 minutes. That was a really long time. My goal was to get him back in 10, but we spent 35 because if we went back within 10, he was going to try and do it again. So I think it's just looking at the end, and that's a tier 3
Mhm.
example, right? So like,
Let-
I'm trying to get that kid. Yeah. When I say out
Can
of
I
it,
give you a real
yeah.
world example at like, say a tier 2 level? So I think Amber's point is well taken. I think, no, and hers
No, I
is real
know,
world too,
I
but
know.
so, okay, so yes, we're directing the, maybe I was misunderstanding the question. Yes, we're directing their work. We're not just like, yeah, you're a behaviorist, thanks for being here, good luck, right? And we kind of let them do all the things, right? We want to have some direction around that, but we do depend on behaviorists to do exactly what Amber is saying, to say, help us with the function of the behavior. Because there is a function of the behavior. And sometimes we get it wrong and we actually instigate more of what we don't want when we think we're helping. And it's a very frustrating place to be. So here's my example. I was a fifth grade class, different district, different place. This young lady got very like boisterous in class and disruptive to the not like bad words or anything, but like standing up, walking around, yelling. And it was like the teacher was like losing her mind. And so I was like, can you help me? I'm trying so hard. I'm doing all these things. I know she wants attention and I'm giving it to her and it's not working. Right. And one function of behavior can be attention seeking. So we went in and looked at what was happening. And when you watch in this lesson, the teacher's presenting and the girl sitting at her desk and she's by herself and all the other kids are in pods of 2. and she's by herself because she's being disruptive. So they're trying to separate her. And then she's kind of like kicking her chair and she's doing all these things. And the teacher calls on her and she keeps doing it. And she leans over to her neighbor and the teacher stands in between the neighbor and the kid. And she escalates to sitting on top of the desk and kind of just like tossing things on the ground, like not violently, but like to get attention. And then this group thing happens and she's put into a group with these other two and she instantly is able to regulate her behavior and act appropriately and continues to act appropriately for about 10 minutes until this same process repeats again. And over some observation, what the team came to the realization is the function of her behavior was attention seeking, but she wanted the attention of her peers. She had zero interest in the attention of an adult. And what the teacher was doing was separating her and giving her attention by, because in the middle of this, she's bending over, she's talking to her one-on-one. And this kid is like, I have zero interest in talking to you, lady. I want to sit with my peers and engage with them. And when she was allowed to do that, it de-escalated her behavior quite a bit. So the teacher shifted how she approached her and where she gave her access to peers and in a way that was working for everybody. And it wasn't perfect, right? There's no panacea. It wasn't like instantly better, but it was remarkably better in a short period of time. And that teacher was like, I've been teaching for years. I was like, this is it. I don't know what to do. Like, you're at the end of your rope. And it made such a difference, that little tweak of how she did her class. And that's the benefit a behaviorist can bring with having that lens and taking data on literally how many times she disrupted and what was happening before and after. Is that
100%.
so? That's kind of
Well-
what the work would be.
Well done.
So
All right. I'm in full support. I think we do have a need for a behaviorist so we can meet those tier 3 supports. What I'm not in favor is doing this through a funding stream of community schools. I think the community school model is going to bring a lot of strings and a lot of things that, we're not quite aware of just yet. We'll find out once we, write the grant. I don't believe we can write the grant just for this need and this need only without, we want X, Y, but it's like, fine, yeah, we'll give you X, Y, but you have to do A, B, C, D at the same time. I have zero interest in going the community school route whatsoever. I think, we need to spend our energies another way to get a behaviorist. And so that's where I'm at, with it right now.
Does that seem like a risk to you that you would apply for the grant and say, we want to use it for these things, and then you would be told, sorry, you have to also do these other things?
I've written other grants before, and it has been my experience that we have to implement things outside of what we write within the grant parameters. What does happen sometimes, and not with CDE, but with previous grants that I've written, it's like, hey, you have to do these things. Whatever I said was 3 hours, 3 1-hour things once a month. And then it's like, oh, and also this 2-hour thing that you have to do every other week. So that kind of workload on the staff that applied for the grant, mainly being in this office and maybe a principal, I have seen that happen before. And when I was talking to our TAC about this, I said, this is my biggest concern because it's really like just a suck for a district that's our size of time, because we wear so many hats and we're not very big, right? But I have never worked with CDE directly on a grant. So my question was, if you have worked with CDE and you've received these grants, when you get the list of things you have to do, does it stay consistent? And the answer was yes. So I feel more comfortable with that than other funding sources I've gone through, because other people who've had grants say, when they tell you what you have to do, it doesn't change. So, I mean, but could that piece change? Maybe. Now, if we wrote the grant and they accept it and or provide it to us for your acceptance, they would then tell us, what are we willing to fund within what you wrote about and what are we not? How many dollars are we giving you? And there would be an agreement there. So you'd also have the opportunity for that.
And that would come back before the board.
Correct, because you'd have to accept those grant funds, which those requirements would come with.
So you feel comfortable putting the work to apply for it, knowing that if you're going to not change, then it can get rejected. by the board.
I think if you asked me, because I'm writing this grant from the perspective of this is what I've been recommending, is what I've been. If that came back and I looked at it, I think at that point, my recommendation to you would be very honest to say, I would recommend we don't accept these grant funds because the ask is too big of a lift at this point.
In that case, I feel comfortable with it because I see the concern too. I definitely don't want to add more work to people. And I also feel like if we're getting money for something, that's what it should be for. So if you feel comfortable with that risk, then I'm comfortable with it.
I know that especially lately, we've been hearing a lot about how there needs, the staff is looking for more support, more resources, more. And this could be a good solution for a couple of the things that we were worried about with the last one. With the wellness center, with the transportation, with a couple different things. It sounds like you came to us with more than just one option for how we could use this grant. And so it looks like we still even have options after we say yes, which I think we should.
If we accepted this grant, it's a 5-year grant, but it comes each year.
Annually.
Do we have the option to refuse it at a given point? Like when the funds come, do we accept them each year, or how does that?
That's a good question. I could look into that, certainly. I would assume if you're saying you would accept the grant, you would be saying you're accepting that 5-year period. But we could look through that agreement if it came, right? If we were accepted and the agreement came, we could definitely look through that in terms of a cancellation clause. Because, I'm with you. If you're, hey, it looks like this and we sign it in 2025 and then in 2027 it changes. If that's not what we agree to, we have to have that conversation. We all have to do what's best for our kids and our people. And if that no longer aligns with what's being offered to us, then we have to decide what we want to do at that point, right?
So just for clarification, we're just tonight, we're discussing to move forward to start the grant process.
To write
not
and
to-
submit.
Not to approve a grant.
Correct. And that's kind of where I started, right? So,
Yeah.
so technically I could go write this grant and just bring it to you when it's done and say, hey, we got this money. Do you want to accept it? But I will be honest, this will be hours of my time and principals will definitely have to contribute input to this. Kelly's probably going to spend some time with me. We're going to spend a lot of time writing.
Mhm.
And if we were to get to June or July when those monies come your way and you have zero interest in accepting them, I would like to know that now because I'll spend my hours and hours doing other stuff.
Well, I
It
think
is a huge grant application.
Correct.
it is. And I think I've made it clear of going the community school route. I don't think that is the direction that we want to head down. I believe it was this week. I was just reading a story of a district in Contra Costa County, I believe, that went heavy into community schools, and now they're on the verge of receivership right now. And so, that's one example there. And I just don't think, it's well time spent, because what's going to come back is something that this board might necessarily, the direction that's not the way they want to go.
I think we'll find out. I think right now it looks like it could be a good use, at least to apply for it. But I think the superintendent's not going to recommend that we accept the grant if it does come back with all sorts of strings that clearly don't go with the guidance and the vision that we've set for it. So I'm for at least applying for this grant.
And I think what would be appropriate is if we receive that we're accepted for the grant, then I would share that with you, informationally. We'll forward that to you as soon as possible. So you guys have time to read through that well before you have to make a decision, because I have a feeling it will be a decent amount of dense reading, in terms of the language. And then we can talk about that at the board meeting. So just to confirm, is the direction then you would like us to apply? And then we'll have further discussion should it come our way that we're accepted.
It's a no for me.
It's a no for me as well.
So yes.
I say yes.
Yes.
Me too.
Okay. Okay, then hearing three, I'll move forward to the grant application and bring it back to you guys. Should it be accepted? I'll let you know either way. Thank you.
Ten C, the DHCS Audit Medi-Cal Billing Option Program.
This is just informational. The DHCA conducted an audit on the cost recovery comparison schedule. And what that is, we take everybody that's qualified for Medi-Cal and come up with a ratio, a number with our consortium of Medi-Cal subscribers in the area. And calculate the costs for the services that we bill for Medi-Cal. And so even if we don't get direct billing, we still get benefit from those students. And so they went back to the years 15, 16, 16, 17, and 17, 18, and they're still conducting more audits. So we're having to dig up records from 10 years ago to give them to, make these audit adjustments. And the district is going to benefit an additional $233,420 based on the net of the audit adjustment. So that's all. If you have any questions or comments about that program.
You just earned yourself a gold star there, mister.
Ching.
So we
Thank
get
you.
about $200,000 to $300,000 a year from that program, where we don't have to do anything other than say we did bill this time, we served this many students, and then they cut us a check based on random moment in time surveys that our staff do.
Great, thank you. All right, anything else on that one? Moving forward to 10D, Board Policy 3290, gifts, grants, and bequests. And Trustee Wedge, you asked to put this on, so we're putting you on the spot to introduce it for us.
I actually sent over my computer's about ready to die and I don't have it here. I sent over I spent some time on it and I wrote up the policy of the changes. How come that wasn't included on this? And I got 2% left.
Oh, so step in our bylaws, step one is to bring it to the
Okay.
attention of everyone that it's of interest. Step two is to provide information from the superintendent, which is what I had sent out. And then we have to have a discussion about whether or not the board wants to move through with amendment of the policy. And then if that's the decision of the board on the direction to move, then the next step would be we'll bring a first read.
So I guess I'm confused. I understand the steps. I'm not arguing that.
Yeah.
As far as talking about it, the changes that I wanted to make, wasn't presented to the board.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like as a resource for them to look
Correct.
at.
For the discussion.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, I misunderstood that. We could bring it back next time. Would you
Yes.
like to have that?
Yes, please.
Okay, we'll
Yep.
put it on next agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, then moving to 10E, board policy updates.
Okay, so CSBA puts out quarterly updates on board policy. This was a discussion during the conference in terms of CSBA introducing that, and it was part of our new trustee training as well. What we do is we have Laura Joseph, who compiles all of those changes from CSBA and presents them in terms of what are you required to take on? What options does the district have to select from? For example, we'll have HR policies where we provide vacation in a certain way, so we have to choose a certain option. Right now, I go through those policies with her and then give them to you for first read to ask questions. And what we had discussed is the potential of, and I think I totally stole it because you were Were you the one who was going to speak about this? I'm so sorry.
Oh, I was.
I
Oh,
just realized I started talking. It's what time is it? 10 o'clock, 10:30. It's too late.
oh
Um,
no.
But anyway, Greg, you're welcome to say more, but I was looking for whether or not someone would want to join me so that I had board input when I meet with Laura prior to bringing it to you as first read. But continue, Greg, sorry.
So yes, as the superintendent was saying, wanted to bring that to the board to see if there's interest in having a trustee, potentially even two, to join the superintendent, going over that policy. Just a little bit more attention to it. That way we've got, a trustee or two. So yeah, wanted to bring that to the board for discussion. I know some districts have like a policy committee where they have two members on, where they review it all.
Now, right now, we already, we use a service already that they go through everything. We pay for that, right? Is there a way we can kind of add something to that service, make it easy? Cause I've looked, those are 100, sometimes 200 pages long. Can we separate that out, to make it a little bit easier of what is actually required by law versus recommendation?
That could be part of what that trustee is doing. So that could be part of it, because then that trustee is going to have a little bit more time invested in it, looking at it, and to be able to ask those questions. Hey, is this purely required by law, or is this just a recommendation?
So that will go back to the people that review it, because I mean,
No, so that
that's
wouldn't go back to the-
that's a whole lot of work. What I'm saying is if you're going through a lot of these changes and then you have to go back, it's like, all right, which one is law, which one is recommendation? Because it's not clear when we get it. It's not clear that it is a recommendations or it is a law.
Well, the rationale generally does include, hey, this is because of new law, why the rationale is for the change. So that is in there, typically. But are you asking that we would then go back to them and ask for them to be more clear?
I think that would be helpful, yes. Because I know I'm aware of those other districts that they get their policies that way, where it's, 2 columns basically, this is per law and this is per recommendation. But, I mean, that's
Yeah.
It already looks that way.
okay.
I
All
think
right.
it
Well,
does.
I might be mistaken. I haven't read it that
Well,
way.
because we get the two attachments, right? One's hundreds of pages, and then the other
Yes.
one is still, sometimes several dozen pages, but it'll have, the
What-
rationale for the change. And typically it says, new state law, new federal law, whatever it might be.
Okay.
And of course, in there sometimes is just CSBA recommendation. One of the CSBA panels I attended was about policy, and they said everything they do is just based on law, not, it's not political or whatever. But there clearly are board policies out there where they introduce language that's recommended by CSBA that goes beyond the legal requirement. It's not the requirement that the board feels a certain way about any particular topic, right? So there probably is a little bit of wiggle room there still. But that's where I think it's a good opportunity for a trustee potentially too to sit in, have more time to go through that policy, get a printout copy, dig through it
I'm interested in this. What's the frequency of something like that?
quarterly.
Yeah, so they do quarterly updates. Actually, in your new trustee spiral where that folds out the calendar,
Oh, yes.
it'll tell you where they drop their policies. The one that we just talked about today with Title IX, that was a special release because of the changes with the August 2024. But if there aren't special releases, they do them quarterly. And I meet with, sorry, Renee. you have a
That's
question?
quite all right. Is this actually changing the policies, writing the policies, or just reading?
No, well, there are decisions to be made. So what happens, well, let me talk through process. Maybe that'll be helpful. So Laura literally mails me a box with a binder in it. And that binder has a bunch of Post-its and it has all the stuff you get electronically. She also sends it to me electronically. And then we set up a Zoom and it's usually about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how many policies we're talking through. And then I kind of look over those ahead of time, so I have a gist of it. And then we go through that smaller packet together and she walks through and explains what's happening with each one. And we certainly get to ones where she's like, this is just a law change. You have to update, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And I'm taking notes on the things that are, I have questions about or whatever, so that it comes here and you guys have questions, I know how to answer. And then there are some where we have to make choices and I'll say something to her like we had a whole batch of HR policies a couple times ago. Say, well, that's a question I have to reach out to my HR manager about. So I'll flag those. Then I do the research I have to do. And those are all ones where we are making a choice, but it's kind of decided for us because it's like, how do you provide sick leave? How do you calculate sick leave? You have to pick one if you have to pick the one that aligns with your system. Then if there are any that are, I haven't necessarily run into any where it's like, you could do this if you want, or you could do that if you want. But if we did, then we would have to make a choice about whether or not we move forward with that policy and which option we choose. So the thought would be that when I sit down with Laura on those Zoom meetings, one or two of you would sit with me. And then we're going through all that information with her together and asking questions. And it just allows you to have more information as well when we get to first and second read to engage with the rest of the board and provide information.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea and
Yeah.
and I would like to nominate Emily to be one of those.
I would like to nominate myself to be the other one.
I second both of those.
Great. Great. Greg's just glad you didn't say his name.
Emily, do you accept your nomination?
I do.
I accept mine as well.
So I think we need to check though, make sure that we may have to make this a committee. Because we have both of you on there. So just before, or be prepared at our February board meeting, we'll have that prepared, to make sure that we do it the proper way.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Or
we'll
you
work
could
on that.
Alternate week times. We could get creative if it's not a
Yeah.
ability.
Yeah, or it could be something that, as we develop our policies too, maybe add it to the organizational meeting, where we determine that. Board governance, update on our request.
Okay, there were three. My apologies. Let me pull them up. Yep, I got it. Okay, so there were three. Emily brought forward the request for the MOU for Wellness Center and multi-payer fee schedule. We talked about those today through various avenues, so that was on the agenda. Jason asked for board policy updates presented for those required by law, separated from those recommended. So we'll work on that. That'll be part of the committee and we'll talk about that in February. And then also, Jason's request for the grants and MOUs, and my apologies on that, but we'll attach his language for the discussion piece and put it back on information and discussion in February. But those are the only three I had.
So going forward for new requests, just so we make sure we aren't missing anything, I know we talked about having a presentation on this, probably in April, and one thing, making sure they talk about metrics. How do we, how do they show that they're helping our students? With actual evidence. And then we just talked about these things from February, creation of policy committee.
That's what I had.
Well,
Okay, I just have 30 or 40 minutes of comments. I'll be very quick. I'll be very quick. Mine is mainly a list of thank yous. EJ, our band teacher, Mr. Charles, he has been running a wonderful band program for our students. He works across 3 sites and he just took kids to honor band, select honor band competition last weekend. And I actually received a lovely email from my mom to say how thankful she was that her child was given that opportunity to participate in music. So
Was it my
Great.
sister that sent you the email?
No, I don't
My-
think so.
My nephew was one of the participants.
Okay,
and
it's
they moved here and are so happy that that program
Yeah.
is there.
he's
So
he's
happy.
he's fantastic. And very shy and doesn't, I think, want to tell me about, doesn't want to bother me. But I said, your one job, my directive to you is to send me calendar invites, because he doesn't send me calendar invites to everything. So he's like, you're busy. I don't want to bother you. But I'd love to go to more, because he's really building something great. So I want to say thank you to him. I want to say that a very big thank you to Jeremy. I think he works a thankless job sometimes, but hopefully not tonight, because I will say unmodified in all areas for the audit. To have the Medi-Cal audit come back as it did, with money being refunded, the fact that our budget is balanced, the fact that he's fun to work with and I can ask him questions and he doesn't throw things at me. I really, really appreciate Jeremy. So I want to say thank you very much to him.
Thank you.
And thank you. And I also want to say thank you to the board as a whole. I know I presented you with a lot of big topics to discuss tonight. I know it's very late and it was very long. And I just want to really say thank you for the discussion. I think, it's hard work, but it is the work. So I really, really appreciate the engagement with the discussion. It meant a lot to me. So that we were able to get through all that together and work together as a team. I really want to say thank you for that. And last but not least, in the back, wishing he didn't say yes to Dave, is Jason Lee, who I never had the privilege of working with in Auburn, but he did work in Auburn before. And Dave at home, I'm very sorry it's late. Please log off as soon as possible. But he is sick, and he's okay, well, good. He can watch the recording later and hear that I thanked him. But Dave is a party of one right now, because we're working on hiring for our second IT position. And so when he was sick, it was very hard to figure out what we were going to do. And Jason just stepped up, volunteered his time, and is here until, at this point, almost 11 p.m. So both thank you. And also, I'm sorry, but we're very appreciative you're here. So thank you.
Like the board meetings when you were with us. I'd just like to support the superintendent's gratitude towards Jeremy. Also extend thank you to the former interim superintendent Michelle Lucia Garcia and Heather Leslie. Some of that audit came back. That was for the last school year, so that's good work that they did. You were part of that too, Jeremy. And Superintendent, thank you for the work you put into this. We were so well informed ahead of time to have these discussions because of the work and effort you put in having conversations with board members, answering our questions. I was emailing you late at night, and you were getting all the information to us well ahead of time to go. So, thank you.
Also, thank you. Thanks for all that work, both of you. So appreciative.
I'm going to echo that. And I really, really appreciate, Superintendent, all the work you put in with both of those topics with us. I mean, it was hours and hours, emails, meetings, phone calls. You go above and beyond, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm just so thankful that we can have we can have a good, healthy discussion, at tonight, and we still all like each other. No, it's thank you, Jeremy. It's definitely a pleasure. You definitely have earned your wage this year. So I expect the same next year from you. And with that, just let's sign it out. Let's go home.
It is 10:38, and
I passed.
You're good. Okay, sorry.
she wasn't authorized. 10:38, and the meeting is adjourned.